Majestic Owl Publishing, LLC presents Gardener's Greenhouse, Book 3 in the Rosemary Harbor Cozy Mystery Series. Written by Wendy Meadows, read for you by Michelle, the AI narrator. Chapter 1. Rose, Hillary called from the back room where she sat on the floor with a clipboard. I have a basket order for today, and I won't have time to put it together before the customer comes to collect. Can you do it for me? Hillary was trying to figure out a stock delivery with more boxes than were printed on the delivery list. It was fine if she double-ordered, but she was worried she may have received someone else's order. A mistake like that always made business difficult. As a business owner herself, she knew what a pain it was to deal with mistakes. Sure, Rose said, coming in from the staff room. Who is it for? Hillary stopped to find the order form, fishing it out from underneath a stack of pamphlets on a chair. It was still early, and everything was chaotic. Trudy Hound, she said, reading the name before holding the form out to Rose. The older woman's features changed, irritation setting in as she snatched the form from Hillary. Of course it's her, Rose sneered. Why would she leave me alone when it's the one thing I want? Hillary and Annabelle glanced at each other, surprised. Annabelle pulled up her shoulders in a shrug. It's just a basket order, Rose, Hillary said. It's hardly the thing to do when you're being spiteful. Hillary Sheridan and her daughter, Annabelle, had opened something special after moving to Rosemary Harbor a little over a year ago. Something Special was a shop that specialized in gift baskets, specifically gift baskets for couples, which contained all manner of sweets and treats and romance. Rose Humbert, the owner of the space they were renting, was a retiree who had decided to help Hillary and Annabelle. Rose owned quite a few buildings along the main road, as well as some of the shops within them. With the constant income and no need to work, she had nothing else to do with her time. It began when Rose offered a helping hand to two women who didn't know their way around town, and later she decided to stick around. Hillary and Rose had become friends soon after they had started working together, and Annabelle thought of Rose as something of a crazy aunt. The three women worked in harmony to provide gifts and baskets to the small coastal town. Rose left the storage room in a huff to prepare the basket. It was easy for Hillary and Annabelle to take Trudy's side, but Rose knew better. Rose was sure Trudy had ordered the basket to rub her existence in Rose's face. The two women were barely speaking. They had never gotten along, but until now it had been a matter of clashing personalities. This time Trudy had done something outright, and Rose was infuriated. For years, Genevieve had owned end-of-the-road books across the road from Something Special. With Rose as the owner of several other stores, they often had to confer with each other about maintenance and style changes. Genevieve had been a good partner, generally letting Rose do what she wanted with the block. But all that was about to change. Genevieve was selling the bookstore, and Trudy Hound had her heart set on buying it. Rose had set her sights on the bookstore years before, though Genevieve had never wanted to sell. Now that Trudy had suddenly developed a desire to buy the store as well, Rose and Trudy were competing for the opportunity. Rose knew Trudy would be a pain in her side. In fact, Rose was convinced that Trudy only wanted to buy the bookstore to infuriate her. It was just like Trudy to look for trouble for no good reason. Annabelle joined Rose in the shop to unpack and shelve the delivered items. I can't believe Trudy is going through with the purchase, Rose said. What could she possibly want with the bookstore? Knowledge is power, books are priceless, Spot the Parrot interjected, quoting the late Matthew Sheridan. I'm sure it's a business investment the same way it is for you, Annabelle said, rolling her eyes at the parrot, who wasn't making the situation any better. It's not the same thing at all, Rose said. She furiously packed items into a basket. This basket was not made with love. There is no way I'll be able to own the whole block as soon as Trudy gets her hands on the bookstore. If you ask me, she's going to hold on to it until the day she dies, and then she'll pass it along to that annoying niece of hers. Annabelle frowned. This jealousy is very unlike you, Rose. Rose shot her a glare. It's not jealousy, it's the truth. Jealousy makes you nasty, Spot squawked. Oh, that damn parrot. Rose snapped. Stay out of my business, will you? Annabelle pursed her lips, fighting to stay quiet, something Spot was never able to do. Rose was furious, and going against her now would do nothing but make things worse. It was unsettling to see Rose this way. The old woman was an established matriarch of the town, albeit a bit nosy and often sarcastic. It wasn't very often that something upset her this much. Well, the sale isn't through yet, Annabelle tried. There is still a chance, isn't there? Hillary joined them in time to hear Annabelle's question. There is hardly any chance at all, Rose said bitterly. Trudy will fight tooth and nail to get that shop. I heard she's gone to the bank to apply for a loan already. Hillary and Annabelle exchanged glances again. The more Rose spoke about the store, the more worked up she became. Maybe it won't be such a bad thing, Hillary said. Annabelle shook her head at her mom, urging her not to carry on with what she was trying to say. But Hillary pushed through. You might find that Trudy is as agreeable as Genevieve has been when she owns the shop. Ha! There is no way that Trudy Hound will be agreeable. She hasn't been agreeable one day in her life, and owning the shop will only make her smug to boot. Hillary shook her head, realizing what Annabelle had been trying to communicate to her. Rose was upset and angry, and there was no way to appease her in this mood. Hillary had known of the rivalry between Trudy and Rose for quite some time. According to Rose, it had started years ago when Trudy and Rose had both wanted to be the spokesperson for Rosemary Harbor's Women's Committee. Rose had had her heart set on the position, but Trudy had gotten it. Since then, they had competed for everything. It was as if they were doing it on purpose. They always participated in the same positions, sales, charities, and competitions. When one of them won, the other would inevitably be furious. For a long time, Trudy had stayed out of retail and focused on all the other things she could take away from Rose, at least according to Rose. Now, Trudy had decided to get involved with business in Rosemary Harbor, and it was proving to feel a little too close to home for Rose. Now it was personal. Hillary had never understood that type of rivalry. In her opinion, there were bigger things in life to worry about. But getting the bookshop was everything to Rose, and until the sale was resolved, this wasn't going away. Well, I don't think Genevieve is going to end up selling after all, Annabelle offered. She loves her bookshop. Rose shook her head. She told me she wants to sell so she can focus on other things. She's very serious about the statewide gardening collective she's involved with now. She's the president of the local gardening club, you see. I doubt she'll change her mind, she fancies herself too important. Annabelle nodded. She had nothing to say to that. She knew how serious the women in Rosemary Harbor were about their gardening. The Rosemary Harbor Gardening Club had worked on the beautiful plants in the park where Annabelle and Hillary went for a walk in the evenings. Annabelle didn't care for gardening at all. She didn't understand how someone could get that excited about plants. If Annabelle got excited about anything, it was animals. The upside about the bookshop is that Genevieve has time to read all those books she offers comments on, Hillary said. Genevieve was a beta reader who offered constructive criticism to authors before their books were published, or whenever they were considering rewrites for new editions. She was also a regular on Goodreads, who wrote a review every time she finished a book. Rose snorted. You can read while in bed at night. Having hobbies like that won't stop her from selling the shop. Rose handled the basket ingredients roughly, dropping 2 of the scented candles in the process. Shoot! Now this broke as well, Rose exclaimed. As if being mad as all get out is not enough, now I'm clumsy too. Annabelle shook her head as she walked toward the counter where Rose was working. She helped Rose pick up the 2 candles and carefully untangled the curly ribbon Rose had been trying to tie. Why don't you let me finish this and go out to a nice breakfast with my mom? Annabelle offered. I'll make sure this basket is complete and delivered to Trudy when she comes to the store. Annabelle hoped to get Rose out of something special before Trudy came to collect the basket. The last thing they needed was a fight between the two women right here in the shop. That's a great idea, Hillary agreed. I'm starving, and I haven't treated myself to a nice breakfast in a while. Why don't we head out to Antonio's? Rose let out a shuddering breath and nodded. Maybe getting out of the shop for a little while will be a good idea, she said. And I haven't had breakfast either. Hillary shot Annabelle a grateful look. The two women disappeared into the staff room to retrieve their coats. After they left, peace reigned once more, and Annabelle went about completing the basket. She thought about Rose's outbursts, and how serious the woman was about getting her hands on the bookshop. Businesses changed hands all the time, Annabelle thought. It was part of the business world, part of the life you entered when you decided to be an entrepreneur. But having grown up in a big city, Annabelle had always had a different outlook on life from the people in the small town of Rosemary Harbor. There sure is a lot of drama around here, Annabelle said to Spot. Small town or no, Rosemary Harbor never ceased to be entertaining. There was no shortage of gossip and rumors, or fights and arguments between old friends and enemies alike. It was like something straight out of a television series. Too much drama. Rosemary Harbor. Drama Harbor, the parrot squawked, and Annabelle laughed. That's exactly right, Spot. We're living a drama like what we watch on television. And you see it all, don't you? Such an observant bird. Spot flapped his wings on his perch, squawking wordlessly. But it wasn't a bitter noise. It was neutral, Spot's way of showing he was in a good mood. Annabelle much preferred the noise the parrot made over Rose's furious outbreaks. Rose was always gossiping or complaining about something, but nothing had ever seemed as serious as her rivalry with Trudy. Annabelle hoped the sale of the store would go to Rose, if only so Rose would stop griping about it and return to a good mood. It might not have been the kindest reason to wish her friend well, but there it was. Chapter 2. Antonio's was a fairly new place in town, an Italian restaurant that sold soul food, as Hillary liked to think of it. It was more popular than Oregano, the restaurant Hillary had frequented before Antonio's had opened. Alberto, the owner of the restaurant and an authentic Italian, had gone out of his way to bring the taste of Italy to the small town. The restaurant was decorated with dark brown suede booths and white-clothed tables. A sash was strung along the ceiling above each table, with the colors of the Italian flag. On the deck outside, the tables were decorated with red and white checkered cloths, and the decor had a Tuscan feel to it. Alberto had hit home with the restaurant. The atmosphere was everything. The restaurant was open for breakfast. Antonio knew what his customers wanted. He had staff for several different shifts, so he could cover breakfast, lunch, and dinner. With Antonio's being open so early in the day, it was the place to be for breakfast, and the restaurant was nearly full. The hostess took Hillary and Rose to a table by the large window, and they sat down on opposite sides. The morning sun fell through the window, warming up the restaurant, and Hillary leaned back against the suede. She sighed. "This is the life, isn't it?" she said to Rose. "I can't help but be in a good mood when I'm here." Rose snorted. "I wish I could say the same." Rose wasn't nearly as calm as Hillary had hoped she would be. If Hillary had brought Rose out to breakfast as a distraction, it wasn't working so far. "If you ask me, she's only trying to irritate me," Rose said. She was still talking about Trudy Hound, and how certain she was that Trudy was trying to rile her up. From what Hillary could tell, it didn't matter whether Trudy was actively trying to work Rose up. Rose was taking care of that all by herself. A few times, Hillary tried to politely change the topic, but Rose was having none of it. She kept on about it, getting more and more upset. Rose hadn't glanced at the menu once, so absorbed in her own misfortune. Hillary was getting irritated. "Rose," she said firmly, "I know you're upset about this, and I'm sure you have your reasons, but I think we should talk about something else. You know I don't like talking about people like this. Maybe you're getting this upset for no reason. Maybe you'll end up owning the place anyway." Rose offered Hillary a pinched face, but she nodded. I guess you're right, she said. It didn't stop her from being very unhappy about the whole business, and the sooner she had an answer, the better. Still, Rose was sure that Trudy would end up with the bookshop in her possession. The old woman was wily and resourceful, and once she set her mind to something, she didn't rest until she got what she wanted. If she did, Rose wouldn't get another shot. Secretly, Rose wished for a monopoly of the town's businesses. She wouldn't play dirty to get it, but how wondrous it would be to own them all, to be that person. It had been a dream of hers for many years. A woman had to have a goal, she always told herself. Now, let's have a relaxing meal, Hillary said, offering Rose a menu and glancing again at her own. I hear their fettuccine Alfredo is amazing. Rose nodded. I heard so too, but surely not for breakfast. I must say, Antonio's is really making a name for itself. It's hard in a place this small when people are so opinionated. Hillary knew firsthand what that was like. When she had moved from Miami, where she had lived her whole life until Matthew had passed away of skin cancer, it had been hard to make an impression on the townsfolk. The community, albeit friendly, had seemed like a closed group, and Hillary had felt like she would never fit in with them or be one of them. It had been Annabelle's idea to do the personalized gift baskets, and it became their saving grace, the one thing that had set them apart enough for the town to start supporting them. Doing something spectacular to impress the townsfolk was a sort of unwritten rule, an initiation of sorts before acceptance was possible. If it hadn't been for Annabelle's wonderful plan and Rose's undying support, Hillary didn't know where they would be now. In Rosemary Harbor, where everyone knew everything and their perspectives on life were small enough to encourage snobbery, making a good name for yourself was hard. It was much easier to create a bad one. Oh, look. Is that Violet Greenwood just coming through the door? Hillary asked, hoping to distract Rose more since she seemed to be still quite upset. Rose looked up. Violet Greenwood was another retiree in town, a woman who was serious about her gardening. She had been in the local gardening club for years as the secretary. She had moved from Sacramento after she retired, where she had worked for years as a botanist. It is, Rose said and waved until Violet walked over to their table. Violet was a little younger than Rose. She still colored her hair to look younger, which Rose didn't do anymore, and her dark brown hair accentuated her light green eyes. She wore high-waisted pants and a pink cardigan, and Hillary had always thought Violet looked the part of a loving grandmother. Hello, Hillary Rose, Violet said. Can I sit down? She took a seat next to Rose before either of them could answer. Hillary guessed she would join them for breakfast, and if it meant that Rose would stop complaining, Hillary was fine with that. So far, her attempts to calm Rose hadn't worked very well. Have you heard Genevieve is selling her bookshop? Violet asked. Hillary groaned inwardly. I've heard, Rose said darkly. I'll tell you now, Trudy is going to get her grubby fingers on it, and then it's over for me. Oh, having Trudy own it is better than keeping Genevieve in the loop. We should count our lucky stars. Why? Rose asked, intrigued. Hillary was curious too, as well as relieved that Violet had taken the conversation in a different direction. Because Genevieve is a conniving little snake, that's why, Violet said fiercely. Her venom almost matched Rose's hatred toward Trudy. I can't stand the woman. You would think more people would see through her, but that's part of what makes her so horrible. She tricks you into liking her. She didn't seem to pull the wool over your eyes, Hillary said dryly. It was clear that Violet despised Genevieve. Hillary wondered if the topic change from Trudy to Genevieve was such a good thing, after all. It had only shifted from gossiping about one person to gossiping about another. Oh, you're quite right about that, Violet said. I won't be fooled by that gentle smile. Have you seen her eyes, how shifty they are? She misses nothing, and she's secured positions in all the right places to keep an eye on the town. Rose nodded, but she wasn't sure if she agreed. She disliked Trudy, but it was a personal rivalry. Genevieve had always been good to her, and Rose had gotten along with her. It had been just that morning when Rose had told Annabelle how she preferred it when Genevieve owned the shop. I believe she's selling the shop because she's too busy with the local gardening club, seeing as she's the president now, Rose offered. Ha! Violet cried out. What a joke. She's president, all right, but it wasn't honestly done. I can tell you that. Violet looked at Hillary and placed her palms flat on the table. I should have been the president. She cheated her way in. Violet seemed as bitter as Rose was, and Hillary wondered if this was a good idea at all. She wished the women would stop. Ask me what she did, ask me, Violet insisted, wanting the attention and the drama. Hillary raised her eyebrows. She couldn't see Genevieve doing something underhanded to secure a position. She didn't know the woman very well, but she couldn't imagine the sweet lady ever meant anyone harm. Sure, she was outspoken, and she had her hand in spreading gossip around town, but to find someone in Rosemary Harbor that wasn't guilty of that was like finding a vegetarian at the local butchery. How? Rose asked, her curiosity burning inside her. It was a competition, as you know, Violet said, warming up to the topic now that she had found an audience. The best orchid won the position. We had all been growing our orchids for months. It's a skill, you see. You can't trim them too late in the year or they don't bloom again. I know my orchids, let me tell you. They were my subject of study. I knew what I was doing. I ask you, how would Genevieve produce a better orchid than mine? It was because she hadn't used an orchid of her own, oh no. She'd stolen mine. No. Rose breathed, enraptured by the scandal. She wouldn't do something like that, would she? How do you know? Oh, I would know my flowers anywhere. And someone had tampered with the hothouse lock ages ago. I keep telling Gordon he should fix it, but he always has an excuse, you know teenagers. So there, tell me how she couldn't have just slipped in and taken it. When I went in to cut an orchid for the election, the one I'd set my sights on was missing, taken away, roots and all. I tell you, it was a clean job, but I know what I'm saying. Rose shook her head, incredulous. Hillary watched the two women. They were working each other into a frenzy, gossiping and encouraging, until, instead of calming down, the situation had ignited. Maybe you should find proof first before making such allegations, Hillary suggested. That's easy for you to say, Violet snapped. You haven't had your sights set on being president of the gardening club for years. I tell you, when you've worked as hard as I have and someone takes it from underneath your nose, you'll understand. Rose nodded solemnly, looking at Hillary with a face that said, I know what she's talking about. Hillary shook her head, sighing. She looked around the restaurant, desperately hoping for a distraction. The two women were egging each other on, and the idea of a distracting meal was failing miserably. Hillary spotted Police Chief Preston Davis coming through the door and saw her chance. She excused herself and approached Preston, intercepting him on the way to his table. Thank goodness there's a familiar face, Hillary said. I don't think I can take much more gossip. Preston was surprised to see Hillary so flustered. He'd always known the woman wasn't one for gossip, and it was something he liked about her, though she was a very curious being. He knew it took a lot to upset her. Please, Hillary added. Take me away from this situation. I don't think I can stand it a minute longer. It was even more surprising to hear Hillary ask him to save her. She had made it clear to him at first that she wasn't romantically interested in him, even though he had hoped their friendship would develop into something more. Hillary was an attractive woman, independent and interesting. After a while, she had told him how she struggled to let go of her late husband and that thinking about dating scared her, which was understandable. Preston had been married once, and even though it hadn't ended well for him, he could understand how someone could become the center of your world. Preston was also surprised Hillary was talking to him, because the last time he had spoken to her, he had firmly told her not to get involved in business that wasn't hers, and she hadn't been too happy about it. Hillary had a knack for getting involved in police business, and even though he had to admit she had helped solve 2 cases, he knew it wasn't right for a civilian to get involved. Hillary had taken offense to his scolding. He was shocked that she wanted him to be her hero now. Shocked but not disappointed, he wanted to spend time with her. If she was in need of a companion, he would be that for her. "Why don't you sit down with me?" Preston offered. He sat down at a table close to Rose and Violet, where Hillary knew they would both overhear their fiery discussions. Well, at least at a different table, she could ignore it. "Thank you," Hillary said and took a seat opposite Preston. "How about a dessert?" Preston offered. He knew Hillary had a sweet tooth, and she looked like she could do with a plate of comfort food. "I would love that," Hillary said. "I haven't even eaten breakfast yet, but I don't think I'll get through this day without sugar." She opened the menu and decided on chocolate mousse. She glanced at Rose again and couldn't help but eavesdrop. "I really shouldn't," Rose was saying. "But I'm so upset, and once won't hurt. I gave up smoking years ago too, but this calls for a cigarette." "We are women in distress," Violet said. "I didn't know Rose smoked," Hillary said to Preston. Preston nodded. "She used to. She quit a long time ago, but I guess whatever is wrong is a big deal." "You would think so with how they're writing the topic," Hillary said, "but I disagree." Hillary watched as Rose and Violet walked away from the table without ordering anything. Rose reached into a glass bowl on the reception desk and retrieved a packet of matches. The 2 women walked outside and disappeared around the corner, presumably to smoke somewhere and carry on with their gossip. Hillary hadn't seen where they had gotten cigarettes from, but maybe they were walking to the store together to buy them. Hillary shook her head, anxiety bunching at the pit of her stomach. She had never seen Rose this worked up. It was common knowledge that Rose was easily drawn in by gossip and dramatic stories, but it had reached a new level. Violet and Rose had never been very close friends as far as Hillary knew, but they were apparently connected in their misery, each of them feeling like they'd been cheated out of their rights to possess something. "Are you all right?" Preston asked Hillary. She looked tense, nervous. "I'm fine," she said. "It's Rose I'm worried about. Sometimes I get tired of gossip, but where it's usually Rose's elixir of life, it seems to be pulling her apart today." Preston smiled warmly. "You're in the wrong place if you get tired of gossip," he said. "I'm afraid gossip is the lifeblood of Rosemary Harbor. But I'm sure you know that by now. How long has it been? A year?" Hillary nodded. "Just over a year," she said. "It's hard to think so much time has passed so quickly." 2 years had passed since Matthew's death, and sometimes it was still hard to believe her husband was gone. After a 5-year fight with skin cancer, it still seemed strange sometimes to wake up and not be in Miami, not taking care of her husband. She would always cherish the time they'd had together, but Hillary didn't regret leaving Miami and all her memories behind to start a new life here with Annabelle. And what an exciting life it had been so far. She'd helped solve crimes, made new friends, and the police chief himself was interested in her. When Matthew died, she thought her life was over. But she had found a new life in Rosemary Harbor, and despite her age, she had started over. "So, do you want to tell me what that was about?" Preston asked. He wanted to know what had upset Rose and what had driven Hillary away from her friend. Hillary shook her head. "Oh no. I'm not telling you anything. I won't gossip the way everyone else does around here. I won't get involved." Preston raised his eyebrows. "That's not a simple feat," he said. "No, you're right. It's as hard as it sounds. But I took your advice to heart about not getting involved." "I meant with the police work," Preston said dryly. "I know what you meant," Hillary said. "But it's not a bad thing not to want to get involved with gossip and rumors. So I'm not getting involved, I'm not spreading gossip, and I'm not making something my problem when it has nothing to do with me. I ran away from those 2 for a reason." Preston nodded. He was flattered that he had been chosen to help her get away, but he had to admit, at least to himself, that he was curious too. Besides, as police chief, it was usually a good thing that he knew the gossip around town. Sometimes all he needed was someone's eagerness to share a story to help him get to the bottom of a case. There weren't any open cases now, though, so it was pure curiosity. "Are you sure you don't want to talk about it?" Preston asked, gently pushing. Hillary shook her head. "No, thank you. I have no intention of getting involved in this. I'm not going to break my new rule for the sake of spreading gossip. It's a bad idea to talk about people anyway. It's better if I don't." Preston frowned. It was spectacular to meet someone in Rosemary Harbor who had no intention to gossip. It was even more surprising to meet someone who had made a rule herself and had decided to stick to it. Hillary's dessert arrived, and she dug into the chocolate mousse as if it were a lifeline as she changed the topic. She spoke about work, about how the shop was doing, and how she wished Annabelle would meet someone special soon. Annabelle was 24 now, a hopeless romantic. She'd remained single because even though something special was doing well now, fitting into Rosemary Harbor was harder than it sounded for the younger generation. Hillary hated to see her daughter alone, and Annabelle was at a good age to meet someone, to settle down and start the kind of life Hillary had had with Matthew. Hillary herself had gotten married at the young age of 22. Preston listened to Hillary as she talked about everything that had nothing to do with Rose and Violet and their gossip. He wished she would tell him what was going on, but he knew better than to keep pressing. He had learned that if he did, Hillary would clam up instead of sharing. When he had told Hillary that she should stay uninvolved, he hadn't quite meant it the way she had decided to apply it to her life. It was her choice, of course, but Preston had a feeling that if Hillary really wanted to get involved again, she would. He was relieved she would stay out of official police business now, with her new rule at least. But a part of him wondered if he would regret asking her to stay out of it. He had asked her to back off every time there'd been a big investigation in Rosemary Harbor, but each time Hillary had gone against his wishes, much to Preston's frustration. And she had solved the cases. The way Hillary's mind worked was beautiful. She was a pro at deductive reasoning, and she was fearless. She always managed to worm herself into places she didn't belong, and she always found things there that the police might otherwise have overlooked. If there was another case and Hillary stayed out of it, he wondered if he would be able to solve it. Of course he would, he told himself. Preston had been a cop for over 30 years, 20 in Rosemary Harbor, 15 as police chief. He knew what he was doing, and he hadn't needed Hillary before she moved to Rosemary Harbor. He could do his job without her, he was sure. He watched Hillary polish her dessert as she talked about trivial things, and he wondered if it would be long before he'd wish she'd get involved again. Chapter 3. Preston's phone rang shrill and incessant as Hillary took the last bite of her dessert. He leaned back in his seat to pull the phone out of his pocket. When he checked the caller ID, his face fell. This wouldn't be good news. "Yes?" Preston asked into the phone, his face solemn. He listened for a moment, nodding as his eyebrows gradually rose and lips parted. Hillary watched him process whatever information was being shared with him. "Yes, I'm close," Preston said curtly. "I'll be right there." He pocketed his phone and stood up as he fished for his wallet and tossed a handful of bills on the table. He had no time to wait for the check or change. "I have to go," he said, jogging away from the table without further explanation. "What's going on?" Hillary asked. She jumped up and followed Preston out of the restaurant. The wail of sirens surrounded Hillary as she set off down the street after Preston. It hung in the air, slicing through the sunny weather, making even the most beautiful day feel ominous. Preston ran down the street towards something special, and for a terrifying moment, Hillary worried that something was wrong with Rose or Annabelle or the shop. But Preston crossed the road instead. A moment later, Hillary saw it. Smoke billowed toward the heavens in angry black clouds, darkening the sky. Rosemary Harbor's fire department was already on the scene, red lights flashing against the walls of the surrounding buildings. Red, the color of emergency and terror and pain. They sprayed white lines of water with thick hoses, the spray pushing in through the broken windows of end-of-the-road books. As the water met the fire, smoke curled out in angry puffs, hissing and crackling at the interference. All around the brownstone building, people gathered in groups, looking on. Their expressions varied from shocked to terrified, to slack-jawed in disbelief. Preston and a few officers had their hands full, driving the onlookers back and keeping them out of the way of the firefighters so they could do their job. Everyone wanted to get a closer look, and they weren't thinking about being in the way. Hillary spotted Rose. She stood watching the building burn, her expression strangely defeated. The shop was already a charred shell of its former self. Rose had had an emotional investment in the shop, if not a financial one yet. Hillary understood Rose's expression. "What happened?" Hillary asked, making her way to the old woman. She glanced back at something special to confirm her shop was okay. "It doesn't look like it affected any of the other stores," Rose said, not giving Hillary a real answer. "It's still structurally sound. It's only the bookshop, right? Isn't it only the bookshop? I think it's only the bookshop." Rose was rambling a little. "How did this happen?" Hillary asked again. "And in broad daylight too?" Rose nodded mutely. She looked shocked. Hillary understood. She felt it too. There was something devastating about witnessing a fire, about losing it all, though she wasn't the one whose dreams had been resting on the shop just minutes before. "Is everyone all right?" Hillary asked the fire marshal as he ran past them. He shouted orders as the firefighters finally extinguished the fire. Two of them circled the building, looking for the best way in. Hillary wasn't surprised when she didn't get an answer. The men had their hands full, taming the fire that so far had been running rampant to devour anything in its path. "I think so," Rose said. She was in a daze, hardly answering Hillary's questions coherently. "Mom," Annabelle said, coming up from behind Hillary. She seemed as shaken up as everyone else. "Oh, you're all right, thank God," Hillary said, grabbing her daughter's hands and squeezing them. Annabelle nodded. "I was in the shop helping a customer when I heard the sirens and saw the fire engine pull up." "What happened?" She watched as the firefighters entered the building. The fire had ruined the bookshop, but it looked like the other stores were perfectly intact. Strange, Annabelle thought. Why would only one shop burn? No doubt all the books had been destroyed. She was relieved it hadn't spread further. So much stock, so many lives could have been lost. Which led Annabelle to think of the employees of the bookstore. "Where's Mandy?" Annabelle asked, referring to the bookstore assistant, who had worked there since before Annabelle and Hillary had arrived. Mandy wasn't exactly a friend, but she was close to Annabelle's age, and the two had hung out a few times. To think that something had happened to Mandy left Annabelle cold. "It's her day off," Rose said flatly. Hillary and Annabelle both looked at Rose. How did she know it was Mandy's day off? Annabelle wondered. Preston walked toward the three women, face grave. Behind him, his officers seemed to have rounded up the crowd a little, driving them back far enough not to be underfoot anymore. "Is everyone all right?" he asked, looking at Annabelle, the only one who hadn't been at Antonio's with them. Hillary was touched by Preston's concern. He was a police chief, and he cared about the people, every last one of them. Annabelle nodded. "We're fine. I was in the shop, but we're wondering about Mandy." "I said it was Mandy's day off," Rose snapped. She seemed beside herself with emotion that Hillary couldn't place. Preston and Annabelle both frowned at Rose and her outburst. Of course, it was a very traumatic situation. "We are only worried about her, that's all," Hillary said. Rose shook her head back and forth, back and forth. She was acting so strangely. "I'm surprised the fire did so little damage to the other shops," Hillary said to Preston. "It's a blessing, of course." Preston nodded. Fire Marshal Stanton says someone called in anonymously shortly after the fire started. Don't spread this around too much, he added, glancing at Rose, but Rose didn't look like she'd registered it at all. For Rose to pass up the chance to get in on the gossip was unlike her. Preston pressed on. If not for the early call, a lot more damage might have been done. Thankfully, we have concerned citizens all around who are willing to keep a watchful eye. Hillary had to agree. She had often gotten upset about how involved people were in each other's business here, but this time, someone's nosiness had saved the building. Small blessings. No one knows who called in? Hillary asked. That person was a hero and had to be honored as such. Preston shook his head. It was probably some kid who shouldn't have bunked school or something like that. Anonymous callers are usually people who don't want the world to know they were there for other reasons. I am going to do the rounds, ask for witness statements. If you ladies will excuse me. He walked away. Hillary watched him approach the first group of people. The anonymous caller would come forward eventually, she was sure of it. He or she was a hero. Hillary was still shocked that something as horrendous as this fire had happened in broad daylight. It seemed like the kind of thing that would happen when no one was watching. Not that it would make it seem any less horrible or any less damaging. Then Hillary caught herself. Who even said the fire was intentional anyway? This is a lot of excitement for such a small town, Hillary said to Rose and Annabelle. I'm sure there are already rumors doing the rounds. She turned to Rose, who seemed to get paler by the second. Rose? Are you all right? Rose opened her mouth to answer, but before she could, Naomi joined them. Naomi owned Sticky Sweet, the sweet shop across the street from Something Special. Naomi's ex-husband, Teddy, had often visited end-of-the-road books to flirt with Mandy, pretending to read self-help books about marriage counseling. Hillary had often sought out the peace and quiet of the bookshop herself when she felt overwhelmed. It was how she had found out about Teddy and Mandy. Something Special, end-of-the-road books and Sticky Sweet were all connected somehow. It was no wonder they had all been emotionally affected by this fire. How awful, Naomi commented. I am so glad they managed to curb the blaze before it jumped to my building. I can't imagine how I would cope with the damage. There are so many onlookers, I'm surprised no one saw what happened. Where were you when the fire was called in? Hillary asked. Naomi shook her head sadly. I was in the shop, but I was taking stock in the back room, or I would have seen it sooner. It was the yelling that called me out. I heard a lot of people arriving before the firefighters. Annabelle and Hillary exchanged glances. Rumors were spreading fast, and they weren't all adding up. Of course, that was the way it was with rumors. Annabelle was sure they would hear the full story from someone soon enough. No one in Rosemary Harbor had the capacity to keep quiet. Cries and shrieks drew the women's attention. There's somebody in here, the firefighter who had gone to check the store shouted out of the broken window. Get an ambulance. Oh no, Rose breathed. Genevieve. She said it so softly, no one but Hillary heard. It's Genevieve, someone closer to the scene shouted, and a murmur rippled through the crowd. Unease settled in Hillary's stomach. How had Rose known? Because it was Genevieve's store? Or perhaps she had known the same way she had known about it being Mandy's day off. Two paramedics pushed their way through the crowd, heading for the building. The firefighter gave them the go-ahead that all was safe, and they clambered through the broken window, ducking their heads as if they could avoid the smoke that way. Panic washed over the crowd until Genevieve's body emerged on a stretcher. She's alive, the firefighter said, following the paramedics to the ambulance. Critical, but alive. Relief washed over Hillary and Annabelle. Seeing the building burn had been traumatic enough. Knowing that someone they knew had been severely injured was hard to stomach. Thank God Genevieve was still alive. Preston and his officers had their hands full, trying to keep the crowd at bay now that there had been another development. Everyone was pushing and shoving, trying to get a glimpse of Genevieve, trying to see how badly she had been hurt. Hillary wasn't sure if the spectators were acting out of worry or curiosity. Perhaps it was a mixture of both. "Mom," Annabelle said behind Hillary. When Hillary turned around, Annabelle's eyes were filled with tears and she looked scared. "Genevieve will be all right, won't she?" Hillary pulled Annabelle into a hug. "I don't know, sweetheart, but I know she's in good hands. Everyone here cares for her, and they will do everything they can to help her." Naomi rubbed Annabelle's back sympathetically. "Your mother's right, Annabelle," Naomi said. "Rosemary Harbor might be a small town, but we have an excellent medical center, and we have the added advantage that everyone cares. Genevieve is an upstanding member of the community. She has everyone rooting for her." Hillary glanced gratefully at Naomi. When she looked back at Rose, the older woman was standing silently to the side, still staring at the burnt building. Hillary wondered what was going through Rose's mind. Today was a first for many things. Hillary hadn't seen Rose as upset as she had been that morning, and now, after the burn and Genevieve being injured, Rose seemed pale and shaky. Again, it was unlike the friend Hillary had known for the past year. Rose had always seemed to her like the kind of woman who could handle anything, strong and confident, on top of the world. She was full of knowledge and wisdom, and made it her business to know everything about everyone. She was always a shoulder to cry on, willing to listen to problems. Seeing her wilted and drained was very out of place. Hillary hoped that for a change, she could be there for Rose the way Rose was always there for her. Slowly, the firefighters wrapped up the building, ensuring the fire was put out completely. Yellow police tape was put up in front of the shop doors to stop civilians from entering the scene. It was dangerous, and with Genevieve out of action, no one could do anything until she was conscious and able to give permission. It struck Hillary that the sale of the shop would be put on hold now that the fire had put Genevieve in the hospital. Bit by bit, the spectators dispersed until only Hillary and Rose stood in the street. Naomi had gone to take care of Sticky Sweet, and Annabelle had returned to something special. "I feel guilty," Rose said, sounding like herself for the first time. Hillary frowned. "What do you possibly have to feel guilty about?" Rose shrugged. "I was so angry earlier today, and believe it or not, I dreamed of doing just this. I wanted to ruin the building so Trudy couldn't have it. I felt like a toddler throwing a temper tantrum." Hillary gasped. She had been upset many times in her life, but she had never thought of doing something so heinous. "I know," Rose said when she saw Hillary's reaction. "It's a terrible thing to think. But we all think horrible things from time to time, don't we? It's acting on it that becomes a problem." Hillary thought about that statement. It was true, acting on a terrible thought would be wrong, and how many times had Hillary herself thought of something she would never bring to fruition? "Still," Rose carried on, "I feel awful that the very thing I had been thinking of happened. Does that make me a terrible person?" "Does what make you a terrible person?" Hillary asked carefully. She wasn't sure if Rose was referring to the thought or something else, something more. Rose sighed heavily. "I don't know, I can't help but feel like I thought this into existence somehow. It sounds ridiculous, I know. Maybe I just need to process it." Rose turned and headed towards something special. Hillary hesitated a beat before following her. What had happened there today had been traumatic for everyone. Hillary didn't doubt that Rose was struggling with pent-up emotions, especially after the bookshop had been the topic of discussion that day. It was hard to watch as an uninvolved party, never mind someone who was as invested in the shop as Rose was. Hillary's cell phone rang, and she stopped before entering the shop and took it out of her pocket. It was an unknown caller, and before she could press talk, the call ended. Hillary frowned and tucked the phone back into her pocket. She looked across the main road toward the ruined building. It was very lucky that the entire building had remained standing, only one shop charred after the blaze. Hillary looked both ways before crossing the road and headed toward the building. The yellow police tape screamed against the black soot covering the front of the shop. No one was to enter, with the property being rendered unsafe for now, but Hillary had no intention of stepping into the store. She looked through one of the broken windows. The heat of the flames must have burst the windows outward. Shattered glass was scattered all over the pavement like fallen stars. The wooden bookshelves inside the shop were black and crumbled, the books reduced to nothing more than piles of ash. The industrial carpet had been melted into a sticky goo that clung to the fine layer of white ash that covered everything like snow. The emptiness and devastation hung in the air, its presence strong, almost like that of a person. Hillary thought about her promise that she would stay uninvolved, her words to Preston still clear in her mind. Right now, Hillary was being nosy, looking at something that wasn't her business. But something didn't add up, and when something didn't add up, it piqued Hillary's curiosity. She would keep whatever she found out to herself, she vowed. If she didn't spread rumors, she was technically still uninvolved and not breaking her promise. When Hillary had seen enough of the destruction in front of her, she turned around to head back to something special. A small burgundy square drew her attention. It was almost unnoticeable, buried in a pile of shattered glass close to the wall, but as soon as Hillary saw it, she couldn't ignore it. Frowning, she bent and carefully pushed the broken glass to the side, light glittering from it like diamonds. The square was a piece of carton with a flint strip at the back. Hillary turned it over in her hand and saw a colorful design on the front. It was a matchbook from the glass jar on the Antonio's reception desk, the same jar Rose had reached into not 2 hours before to take a matchbook for herself. Hillary flipped open the matchbook with her thumb. The matches were all neatly lined up, burgundy heads in a row with only 2 matches missing from the very end. A shiver ran down Hillary's spine. To find matches at the scene of the shop burning down suggested that it wasn't an accident. Could someone have done this on purpose after all? Hillary turned the matchbook around and around in her hands, trying to decide what to do. There was no proof that someone had intended for the fire to take place, but finding a matchbook in front of a building that had just burned down seemed to point to the obvious. The right thing to do would be to turn the matchbook over to Preston. But something stopped her. Who could do such a thing? Immediately, the conversations Rose and Violet had had about Genevieve and her shop, the business transaction, the sale, and Trudy popped into Hillary's mind. The 2 women had both been very upset. But upset enough to cause something like this? Surely not. They had been upset, but Genevieve was a friend, part of the retirement community. Rose had seemed very distraught when she saw Genevieve had been injured. And she had known that it was Mandy's day off. But everyone was upset that Genevieve was hurt, not Rose alone. Annabelle had been crying about it too, for crying out loud. That didn't mean that Rose had ulterior motives, or that she should be implicated in the crime. Hillary felt bad, even considering that her friend was capable of something so awful. If in fact it was a crime. Hillary so badly wanted to believe that it was merely an accident, that no one would have the intention of causing harm and damage in the way the bookshop had been damaged. But with the matchbook on the scene, a shop that had been shut down until further notice, and a shop owner who was severely injured, it was difficult to assume the fire hadn't been started on purpose. Hillary flashed back to Rose's hand reaching into the glass container on the reception counter at Antonio's. Rose hadn't smoked in years, Preston had said. Hillary hadn't known that Rose had smoked at all. She had been very upset, but to start smoking again seemed rather extreme in hindsight. And thinking back, Hillary never saw Rose and Violet light their cigarettes and smoke together. She had seen them walk away and had assumed it was what they were doing. Where had they really gone? Why had Rose been one of the first people on the scene of the fire? There were too many questions unanswered, too many reasons why Hillary wouldn't want to jump to conclusions, because the conclusions were too awful. So, instead of phoning Preston and telling him she had found something, Hillary turned the matchbook over in her hand one more time before slipping it into her pocket. She turned around and looked both ways before crossing the main road again. No one was around now. No one had seen her pick up the matchbook, and no one had seen her put it in her pocket instead of reporting it. Before entering something special, Hillary took a deep breath. Chapter 4. Hillary needed to know more. She had promised herself she wouldn't get involved, but if this was about Rose, about her possibly being implicated in a crime that could be a lot worse than it had seemed at first, she wanted to be sure of her facts. The first step was to go back to Antonio's. Hillary didn't want to do it during working hours. She didn't want Rose to know what she was up to, and she didn't want to lie about it if Rose asked. 2 days had passed since the fire, and Rose had been very down in the mouth, keeping to herself and barely speaking. She hadn't attempted to spread gossip or find out rumors, which was very unlike her. Hillary and Annabelle were both worried about their friend. At least Genevieve was still holding on. After she had been rushed to the emergency room at the clinic, news was released that although badly injured with third-degree burns on her arms, she was going to be okay. She was still in intensive care. A lot of damage had been done to her lungs from the smoke, but she was out of danger. When the 3 women at Something Special had heard the news, Rose had only seemed mildly relieved. Hillary had watched Rose's reaction carefully, hoping for something that would tell her she had no reason to be suspicious of her friend. Even though she didn't want to, Hillary had to admit to herself that Rose's reaction wasn't quite what she hoped it would be. "We're going out," Hillary announced that evening when she was at home with Annabelle. Annabelle had already changed into pajama pants, although her face was still made up. "What? Tonight?" Annabelle asked. "Tonight," Hillary confirmed. "I made a reservation at Antonio's for dinner." Annabelle pulled a face like she used to when she was a teenager. "We just got home after a long day of work, Mom. I don't feel like going out." "Did you really make reservations? Why didn't you tell me?" Hillary shrugged. "Because I only made them half an hour ago. I wanted to be sure we would get a table." "Come on, having dinner with your mother won't be so bad." "Fine," Annabelle groaned, realizing that Hillary was not going to change her mind. Even though Annabelle had always tried growing up, she had learned from a very early age that Hillary wasn't someone to argue with. She was stubborn and particular, and when she put her mind to something, not much could throw her off course. Annabelle sighed and turned around, then walked back to her room. She pulled on jeans with the tank top she was already wearing and started on her hair. If they were going to Antonio's, she wanted to look decent. "Annabelle, come on, what's taking so long?" Hillary asked half an hour later. "If we don't leave now, I'm going to lose the reservation." Annabelle emerged from the room. "I was trying to make myself look presentable. We can go now." "You didn't have to go through such a fuss, it's only Antonio's. It's hardly a 5-star restaurant." "If I had known we were going out," Annabelle said, "I would have washed my hair. I look like a mess." "I don't understand why you want to go out again. These days it's all you do." Hillary narrowed her eyes at Annabelle. Her daughter was giving her attitude, but that wasn't something new. They had gotten through the teenage years together, after all. It was Annabelle's hair that drew Hillary's attention. Her daughter was complaining that her hair was a mess, but she had pinned it into a very stylish, messy bun. Hillary wouldn't have thought much of it if she hadn't learned Annabelle had watched videos on YouTube to learn how to do it. Hillary and Annabelle didn't have an internet connection at home. The shop was connected, so whenever they wanted to look something up, they used the computer at Something Special. The only downside of sharing a public computer among the 3 women, Rose used the internet sometimes as well, was that there was a shared user history, so Hillary knew Annabelle was fussing. She just couldn't figure out why. Annabelle and Hillary drove to Antonio's. It wasn't very far, and they could easily have walked, but at night a chill came from the ocean, and Hillary never felt comfortable walking alone in the dark when it was just the 2 of them. Rosemary Harbor was perfectly safe, but she still hadn't shaken her big city mentality. When they arrived at Antonio's, Hillary was glad she had made a reservation. Half the town was already seated at the tables inside and outside, and Hillary was sure she wouldn't have gotten a seat if she had phoned ahead. "It looks like it's busy tonight," Annabelle said. "And the bar will be open." "I guess it will," Hillary said, not understanding why Annabelle was worried about the bar being open. If it wasn't very busy, Alberto would man the bar himself, or he would hand it over to one of his bartenders, but the bar was always open. When Hillary and Annabelle walked into the restaurant, Annabelle glanced toward the bar, and Hillary didn't miss the bartender, a young man with dark hair and a shy smile, who lifted his hand in a wave. Hillary glanced at Annabelle, who smiled, a blush crawling into her cheeks. So that was what it was all about, Hillary thought. The hair, the time it took for Annabelle to get ready, it was all for a boy. Hillary smiled to herself. It was about time Annabelle found someone she was interested in. They had lived in Rosemary Harbor for over a year, and she hadn't had any suitors or been interested in anyone. Annabelle was a hopeless romantic, and she deserved to be in love and in a relationship. Hillary had had many wonderful years with Matthew before he'd passed, and she wanted the same for Annabelle. "Do you want to wait at the bar while I get our table?" Hillary suggested. Annabelle blushed again. "Will you call me?" "I will. Go on, enjoy yourself." Hillary watched as Annabelle walked toward the bar, the eyes of the young bartender lighting up as she came closer. How had they met? Hillary wondered. Time would tell if anything happened, and if this boy was worth it for Annabelle, but Hillary was happy for her daughter. Hillary walked toward the hostess stand, where she waited for another couple to announce their reservation. While she waited, she looked around. There were so many guests, and they all looked so happy. Their lives were filled to the brim, their interests spread out on the table like an offering to each other. Hillary couldn't help but feel sad for Genevieve, who was in the hospital being nursed back to health after a terrible ordeal, and for Rose, who seemed so affected by what happened that she couldn't seem to deal with it. With Annabelle distracted, Hillary could investigate without explaining too much. It was a blessing in disguise that her daughter was interested in the bartender. Hopefully, being at the restaurant tonight would shed a little light on the situation. When Hillary reached the front of the line, the seating hostess, another young thing straight out of school, smiled brightly at her. "Hi, I'm Tina. Can I take your name?" she asked. "Sheridan," Hillary answered, giving her surname when she'd booked under her first name to buy herself a little time. While the Tina typed her name into the computer to locate the reservation, Hillary looked around, her eyes falling on the glass ball with the matchbooks in it. She took one, holding it up and studying it. "How clever to have matchbooks here," she said. Tina glanced at her, with an empty smile. "Have the matchbooks always had this design?" Hillary asked casually. Tina looked up, a little more interested this time. "Actually, no," she said. "Alberto used to have them delivered in the standard olive green. They're much better now. A local author designed them for us, and we just got those in." Hillary nodded, forcing a smile, but her heart sank. "That sounds great, having someone local chip in," she enthused. She tried to be positive about it, but all she could think was that the matchbook she had found between the glass on the pavement outside the burned building had been new. Newer than she had hoped it would be. New enough to implicate Rose, which Hillary had hoped wouldn't be the case. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but I can't find your name on our reservation list," Tina said politely. "Oh, it must be my mistake," Hillary said. "I think I booked it under Hillary instead." Tina went about locating the name again. Hillary glanced in the direction of the bar, where Annabelle was in conversation with the young man. She was all smiles, her head tipped a little to the side, leaning casually on the bar and not looking anything like the self-conscious Annabelle Hillary was used to. Hillary felt a little disheartened after what she had found out about the matchbooks and the recent design change. Disheartened enough to reconsider her night out, to not want to sit down to dinner after all. But it seemed harsh to pull Annabelle away from her suitor when she was obviously enjoying herself. Hillary didn't want to spoil Annabelle's fun, especially after she had been the one to drag her out to dinner. So she let Tina mark her as having taken her reservation. Hillary considered telling Annabelle where she was, but decided against it. Annabelle was grown up now, able to find her mother on her own. She nodded at Tina, who asked her to follow her through to the dining area. Tina stopped, and Hillary nearly bumped into her. "I'm sorry," she said, looking flustered. "I forgot. Please follow me." She took a turn, leading Hillary down a corridor that seemed to remove them from the dining area. Hillary was ushered into a side room that looked like a private banquet hall. A few other guests were waiting in small groups, talking, barely looking up when Tina led Hillary into the room. Hillary frowned. "What's going on?" Hillary asked. She had been to Antonio's a few times, but she had never been taken to a side room like this. She hadn't even known it existed. It seemed like the type of room to be hired out for a business meeting or something. "I'm so sorry," Tina said. "I completely forgot that I have to bring you to wait here for the signing. The dining room isn't large enough for everyone to go in at the same time." "What are you talking about?" Hillary asked. "I know you might be eager to get to the signing, but Alberto asked me to take you through in groups of 10 at a time. I hope you don't mind waiting a moment." She looked apologetic. "What's happening here tonight?" Hillary asked, realizing she had missed something. "What is everyone waiting for?" "Oh, you don't know?" Tina asked. "I thought it was what you booked for. It's a book signing for our local author, Samantha Justin. Have you heard of her?" Hillary nodded. She had in fact heard of Samantha Justin. Her praise was sung all over town as one of the best writers the town had ever produced. With the town being a retirement town of sorts, a lot of the older folk who came to live out their retirement in Rosemary Harbor had tried their hand at writing. With the romantic coastline and nothing but time on their hands, many people felt inspired. Not many of them continued on to be published. Samantha Justin wasn't retiring age exactly, but she had written a bestseller in her spare time and had decided to quit her day job, moving to Rosemary Harbor to make a career of her writing. Hillary was starting to put two and two together. No wonder it seemed so full and the bartenders ready to serve so many people. "I've never heard of a book signing taking place in a restaurant before," Hillary said. "Does Antonio often do events like this?" Tina shook her head, looking at Hillary strangely. "A restaurant doesn't exactly draw the bookworms, does it?" she asked. "Not quite," Hillary agreed. "Isn't something like this supposed to happen at the library? Or at the bookstore?" The moment the words left Hillary's mouth, she realized what she'd said. Of course, the signing should have taken place at End of the Road Books. But now that it had burned down, the signing had been moved to Antonio's. "I guess when things go wrong we improvise, right?" Tina said. Alberto was happy to let it take place here. "I think it's good publicity for him, a book signing bang in the middle of his dining room. It's sure made us very busy. I can barely keep up." Hillary nodded. She could see how it would be good publicity for Alberto. It struck her that everyone moved on, that time waited for no one, and that it was already 2 days after the fire. The book signing had to happen somewhere, so it was set up in Antonio's. There was no leaving the room once Hillary had been escorted in. More guests arrived, and after a while, Tina stood by the door and drew everyone's attention. "If you'll follow me, ladies and gentlemen, we'll go through to see Ms. Justin now. Single file, please. Everyone will get a chance. Alberto wanted me to remind you we take cash and card." She opened the door and led the way. Hillary fell into step with the others. How had she ended up here? Through her curiosity, that was how, she thought. Annabelle was happily flirting away while Hillary had ended up in a queue, waiting to see an author she didn't really care for, to get a book signed she hadn't read. Hillary followed the queue, passing through the doors into the dining room. Before long, Hillary was close enough to the front to study Samantha Justin. She had heard of the woman, but had never had the opportunity to meet her. Samantha sat behind a desk with a tablecloth over it, stacks of her books piled on both sides. Her light hair was cut into a professional bob. She wore a green blazer that made her gray eyes seem somehow stormy. There was something about the woman that irritated Hillary, although she couldn't place it. A table was set up a few feet before Samantha's table, where the book was on display. One of the waiters manned the sales. He had a card machine and a petty cash box. "Do you have a copy of the book?" the waiter asked Hillary. He held out a book to her. Trial by Fire was the title. She took it and flipped it over, reading the blurb on the back. The book was a mystery about arson and a detective who had to connect the dots between random fires happening throughout the town. Wow, could the topic have been any touchier? Hillary thought. "I'll take it," Hillary said, even though she rarely read mysteries. The waiter smiled and took Hillary's card. She wasn't going to get a meal, but a book about a fire when it was exactly what they were dealing with seemed like a close second. "Thank you," Hillary said, taking the book. She was next at the author's table and handed Samantha the brand new book. "Thank you for buying my book," Samantha said, taking the book. When she looked up at Hillary, her eyes were the color of slate, and an expression flickered over her face too fast for Hillary to place. "You're the owner of the gift shop where Rose Humbert works, aren't you?" she asked. Hillary nodded. "I'm Hillary Sheridan," she said. "Well, it's great to get to know more of the townsfolk," Samantha said brightly. She bent over the book and scribbled something on the inside of the cover. She closed the book and handed it back to Hillary with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Have a good evening," she said. "Thank you so much for your support." Hillary nodded, taking the book. She wasn't in the best mood. She wanted to get out of the restaurant, away from the throngs of people that appeared to be starstruck. She didn't share the same sentiment. Hillary headed toward the bar to tear Annabelle away and go home. Chapter 5. The next morning, Hillary overslept. The alarm's batteries had gone dead, and it was over an hour later when Hillary jerked awake, sure something was wrong. The sun was well through her window at the wrong angle. "Annabelle, we're late," Hillary cried, scrambling out of bed. There was no time for a shower. She pulled on clothes, a pair of black pants and the embroidered something special shirt they all wore. "Are you up?" Hillary asked, hurrying to Annabelle's room to get her daughter out of bed. Annabelle groaned, complaining about being yanked out of her peaceful sleep. "Get dressed," Hillary ordered. "Rose is handling it all alone right now." It took the two women less than 20 minutes to get ready by some miracle, and they were only 45 minutes late for opening time. When Hillary jogged toward the front door, the store was already open, and she nearly bumped into Preston, who was on his way in through the door. "Oh, sorry," Hillary said. Preston shook his head. "Don't worry about it. You're in a hurry." Hillary nodded, out of breath, cheeks flushed. Annabelle mumbled a good morning to Preston, before pushing past him and entering the shop. She wasn't about to join her mother in a friendly conversation with him. She liked the man, but she didn't approve of her mother's interest in him when it had only been 2 years since her father had died. "Please come in," Hillary said after they exchanged pleasantries. "I'm sure we can help you find whatever it is you're looking for." Hillary walked first into the shop. Preston followed her. Spot was unusually quiet. When Hillary looked for him on his perch, he was missing. She spun around as the parrot appeared behind Preston, squawking, "Boo!" Preston jumped and Hillary laughed. "That's not funny," Preston said, glaring at the bird. "I'm sorry," Hillary said, still giggling. "I guess he's in a mood today." Spot returned to his perch. "What was it you needed?" Rose appeared from the back room. She greeted Preston with a smile. "Actually, it's Rose I'm looking for," Preston said. Hillary frowned. "Me? What for?" Rose asked. He hesitated. "I'm afraid I'm here to take you to the station for questioning about the arson case," Preston said, looking apologetic. Everyone was frozen for a moment, trying to digest what Preston had said. "What?" Hillary asked. "Surely not. What does she have to do with anything?" Hillary hadn't turned in the matchbook she had found, and she wondered what kind of evidence the police had that might implicate Rose. Preston shook his head. "I'm not at liberty to discuss it out of the station, I'm afraid." Rose nodded solemnly. "I'll come with you," she said. Annabelle emerged from the storage room where she had begun preparing stock for the day, her usual job. "What's going on?" she asked when she saw her mother's shocked face and Preston's apologetic expression. Rose glanced at Annabelle with a defeated expression that seemed out of place. "What's happening?" "Wait. No," Hillary said. "Rose, you didn't do anything wrong." "Hillary," Preston said. "Please. The fire wasn't an accident. We have a suspect list, we're working on it. Don't interfere, okay?" "Is Rose being arrested?" Annabelle asked, connecting the dots. She didn't get an answer, and that was answer enough. Annabelle was shocked and couldn't find the words. Surely there had to be a mistake. Hillary shook her head. She wasn't going to let Rose walk out the door with Preston to be questioned for a crime she couldn't have committed. No matter how Hillary looked at it, no matter what she had found, she wasn't willing to believe that Rose could have done something so terrible. Rose was innocent, she was sure of it. She had to be. "You can't do this, I won't let you," Hillary said again. When crimes had happened before, Hillary had been shocked about the people on the suspect list from time to time, but she had never interfered with Preston because she knew he was doing his job. This time his suspect was someone she knew and knew well. Rose was a friend. There was no way she could have done something so terrible. Hillary had thought about it a lot since the fire. It had been all that had been on her mind, in fact, and she had come to the conclusion that it couldn't have been Rose. Rose had been too distraught, too hurt about the building, and about Genevieve being hurt to have done it. She couldn't be guilty. "Hillary," Preston said gently, "you told me that you weren't going to get involved with anything anymore. Please stay out of this." Hillary started to protest, but Rose interrupted. "It's okay, Hillary. What harm can a few questions do?" What harm could a few questions do? They could lock her up if they thought there was enough evidence to implicate her, and Hillary was suddenly terrified that there would be enough. Deep down inside, she was terrified that she was wrong about her friend. "No," Hillary said again. "If it's about Rose and her innocence, I'm not going to stay out of it. You can't do this to her, it's not fair." Hillary was on the verge of hysterics. "Mom, it's going to be all right," Annabelle said. "Let Preston do his job. I'm sure it will be fine." She noticed her mom was struggling to keep it together, and it upset Annabelle. The last time she had seen her mom lose control was when they'd realized they only had a few weeks left with Annabelle's father. Hillary had been strong through the cancer diagnosis and all the treatments, a woman of steel, and it had only been when she'd realized they were losing the battle that she'd lost it for a few days. After that, the last days with Matthew had been normal, with Hillary on top of everything. The death, the funeral, the move, Hillary had handled everything with an unparalleled inner strength. To see her mother like this scared Annabelle. "I'm going to the staff room to get my coat," Rose said, and Preston nodded. "You can't do this," Hillary said again, putting her hand on Preston's arm as soon as Rose left the room. "She's innocent. You know she is." Preston sighed. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be, Hillary. I have to take her with me, you know I don't have a choice." "You always have a choice," Hillary said. "I'm not letting her go." Preston shook his head, looking at Annabelle, hoping she could help. He hated having to upset Hillary, but he was doing his job. "No," Hillary exclaimed firmly. "It's not happening." Preston shook his head. "This is why I didn't want you to get involved in cases. Because you get too close when you shouldn't. You can't bend the law when it suits you or when it's someone you like." Hillary was angry now. "Taking Rose with you has nothing to do with your past cases or what I helped with," she said. She glanced at Annabelle for backup, but her daughter shook her head. Annabelle wasn't going to get involved when it was about the law. Maybe it was better too. You don't know everything that's going on around town, Preston said. There's much more than you know. There was no arguing with that. Hillary didn't keep her ear to the ground when it came to gossip the way some of the other inhabitants did, but he knew of someone who did. Rose does, Hillary said. Rose knows everything that goes on in this town. Preston's face changed, a look of steely resolve settling across his features. You're not wrong, Hillary, he said, but he left it at that. Hillary frowned, trying to figure out what he was trying to say. Rose emerged from the staff room, her coat over her shoulders, handbag over her arm. Ready? Preston asked. Rose nodded. She was going willingly, so Preston didn't cuff her. A small victory, Hillary thought. At least Rose wasn't being escorted out as a criminal. Rose hugged Hillary. Thank you for sticking up for me, she said. You're saying it like this is goodbye, Hillary said, and she couldn't help but sound angry. She was furious with Preston for doing this. Rose chuckled. Don't be silly, she said. It's just a couple of questions. They have to start somewhere. Don't you, Chief? Preston looked uncomfortable, shuffling from one foot to the other. I'm off. I'll be back before you know it. I have nothing to hide, Rose said, and she let Preston escort her out of the shop. Hillary felt like she had been hit by a train. She walked into the staff room and tucked her hand into her coat pocket, her fingers closing around the matchbook she hadn't turned in. If she had the matchbook, then what did the police have? Are you okay, Mom? Annabelle asked, coming into the staff room. Hillary let go of the matchbook in her coat pocket and took a step away from the coat rack. I don't understand what's happening. Rose would never do such a thing. Annabelle shook her head, hugging her mom. Don't worry. It's just questions like Rose said. They'll find out soon enough she's innocent. Hillary nodded, but she wasn't so sure. She was worried for Rose. And after Preston's expression when she had said Rose knew everything, she wasn't sure what he'd meant. What did Rose know? Come on, Annabelle said. We have stock to unpack. Hillary followed Annabelle to the front of the shop, but her mind was buzzing. Somewhere, she was missing something. It was time to get involved with things again, whether Preston liked it or not. Hillary didn't owe the man anything. They weren't dating, after all, nothing more than friendship. Even if there was more, if someone told Hillary not to do something, she wanted to do just that. And Preston had told her to stay out of it. So she was going to find out what it was that no one wanted her to know. Chapter 6. Hillary struggled to focus on work. Unpacking stock and cleaning shelves wasn't exactly brain work, which meant that Hillary's mind was free to wander. She couldn't stop thinking about Rose, how Preston could possibly have put her on a suspect list. What did he have on her? When it was close to lunchtime, Hillary found Annabelle in the staff room. Do you mind if I go out for lunch? I know it's just the two of us now, but I need to get some air, clear my head, she said. Annabelle shook her head. Of course, Mom. I think it will do you good. I'll be fine here. Are you sure? Annabelle rolled her eyes. How many times have I manned the shop completely alone? I promise, Mom, I'll be fine. If I'm not, I'll phone you. Hillary was happy with that and thanked Annabelle before she left the shop. The truth was, she didn't want to clear her head. She wanted to start investigating, see if she could get behind what was going on with Rose. She figured the first place to start was with Trudy Hound. Rose had been furious about the potential sale of the bookshop to Trudy. If Rose had started that fire, which Hillary still didn't want to believe, she wouldn't have done it until she was sure that Trudy would buy the building. But even if she was sure about the sale going to Trudy, even then, the fire wouldn't do her any good. Which was why Hillary wanted to talk to Trudy herself. After asking around a little bit, Hillary found out that Trudy was at the local gardening club. The gardening club was hosted at the clubhouse close to the park, where the members had the opportunity to plant plants and learn about various gardening techniques. Recently, They had added flower arranging to their repertoire. It wasn't something Hillary would ever have been interested in, but the women who were part of the club were serious about it. When Hillary arrived at the club, Violet was at the front desk. "Oh, what a surprise to see you here," Violet said when she saw Hillary. "Have you decided to join our little gardening group?" Hillary shook her head. "I'm afraid I won't have time for that," she said politely. It was better than telling Violet she thought it would be a waste of her time. "I was looking for Trudy. Is she here?" Violet sighed and nodded. "She's in the garden at the back. If you go through those doors," Violet said, pointing, "you can't miss her." Hillary smiled, thanking Violet, and walked toward the doors. She stepped into the garden and was blown away by the beauty. Hothouses were arranged along the periphery of the property, with patches of ground scattered in the middle. Flowers of all shapes and colors were wildly in bloom, making the place look bright and cheerful. Between flowering plants to the left, on an empty patch of ground, Trudy kneeled. She wore gardening gloves, and she was focused on what she was doing. "Trudy," Hillary said, walking closer, "I was wondering if you have a minute." Trudy looked up and narrowed her eyes. "I don't know if you know anything about retirement. A minute's all we ever have. Minutes, hours, days. It all blurs into nothing. What do you want?" Hillary was taken aback by how harsh Trudy sounded. It wasn't exactly the warm welcome she had expected. She was starting to understand why Rose didn't get along with the woman. "What are you planting?" Hillary asked, noticing that Trudy was replanting seedlings. "I'm sure you're not here to make small talk about plants," Trudy said without answering Hillary's question. Gosh, Hillary thought. The woman really was difficult. "I wanted to ask about the bookshop," Hillary said, getting to the point. Trudy wasn't going to let her talk about anything else. "What's the point now?" Trudy asked. "It's a charred mess." Hillary took a deep breath, trying again. "It's tragic what happened to the store. I'm only asking because I know Rose was quite upset that the building was ruined. She mentioned you were interested in it as well." Rose had much more than mentioned Trudy's interest, but Hillary played it down. Trudy looked up from her seedlings, studying Hillary. "Everyone in this town is so damn nosy," she said. "If you must know, I was going to buy the building, but I can't afford it now that I'll have to renovate. It's not a good investment anymore. Pity, it would have felt great to steal the property from Rose." The woman chuckled. "Rose has had her sights set on that building for so long." "Were you going to buy the building only to get to Rose?" Hillary asked. When Rose had griped about it, she had said again and again how Trudy had only wanted to buy the building to annoy her. Hillary hadn't thought it could be true, but Trudy was admitting as much. "Well, when you're my age, you start looking for ways to entertain yourself. It's just a little innocent fun." Hillary tried to gauge how old Trudy was, and decided the woman couldn't be much older than herself. Still, she was sure she would never do something spiteful for kicks. "This doesn't seem very innocent to me," Hillary said. "I have come to know Rose as a very soft and caring person." "Ha!" Trudy exclaimed. "What a joke. I know you're new to town, dear, so I'll forgive your naivete." Hillary bristled at Trudy's condescending comment. She didn't say anything, though, because she wanted Trudy to keep talking. "You have only known Rose for a while, but I grew up with her, right here in Rosemary Harbor. You don't know what kind of person she used to be. Everyone calms down when they grow old." If that were true, Hillary didn't want to know what Trudy used to be like as a younger woman. She was barely agreeable now. "See," Trudy continued, "when Rose and I were younger, Rose was very cutthroat in attaining properties. She did whatever it took to get her hands on a place." "Isn't it all in the name of business?" Hillary asked. "With that logic, so is what I was about to do." Hillary couldn't argue with that statement. So, if Rose was a little more aggressive in pursuing what she wanted, that makes her a bad person? Trudy chuckled. "Oh, certainly not. Wanting something and making a plan to get it is admirable. It's the way you go about it that makes you a good or a bad person. Hillary frowned, shaking her head. I don't understand. Trudy laughed as if Hillary had said something funny. No, how could you? How could you know all Rose's sides if the one she's showing now is the only one you know? You can hardly be blamed. Again, Trudy used the condescending tone that Hillary didn't appreciate. But Hillary wanted to find out what Trudy saw in Rose, hoping that somehow it would give her an answer. So what happened? Oh, let's just say that it's not the first time Rosemary Harbor has seen arson. Hillary was shocked. Are you saying? Trudy nodded. Like I said, Rose would stop at nothing to get what she wanted. This was years ago, easily over a decade, but these things don't go away, do they? They don't call it a permanent record for nothing. It's a good thing she had her own businesses, because she wouldn't get a job anywhere they do a background check. Trudy chuckled again, as if the whole thing was funny rather than shocking. It's a good thing no one ever found out what I did, or I would have struggled to be a career woman. Hillary had heard enough. She didn't like Trudy one bit. The old woman was rude and insufferable. Hillary didn't want to believe anything she had told her. Hillary wondered if this was what Preston had been referring to. Perhaps she had been too hasty to get upset with him when he was merely doing his job. Hillary had only known Rose for a little more than a year, but she was starting to understand that Rose had a whole history she knew nothing of. The two women were silent for a while, Trudy tending to the seedling and Hillary caught up in her own thoughts. She wondered if Rose and Trudy went as far back as Trudy had said they did. If they had grown up together in Rosemary Harbor, their rivalry would have made more sense. How's everything going? Violet asked, joining the ladies outside. Hillary noticed Trudy rolling her eyes. It's going fine, Violet. There's not really much that can go wrong, is there? Trudy was snappy. Violet ignored Trudy's mood and studied the seedlings over Trudy's shoulder. Try to plant them a little further apart, Violet said, pointing. You don't want to crowd them. Trudy didn't try to hide her exasperated sigh. Violet smirked. Don't forget to water them when you're done, she added. These little guys will be thirsty. Violet giggled at her personification of the plants and gave Hillary a warm smile. I need to tend to a couple of things inside. Are you ladies all right out here? Other than being suffocated by boredom, we are dandy, Trudy said sarcastically. That's great, Violet said brightly. She turned and walked back into the building. Trudy followed Violet with her eyes until the other woman disappeared inside. You know, Trudy said, looking at Hillary. Violet had just as much of a bone to pick with Genevieve as Rose did. Hillary shook her head. Rose didn't have a bone to pick with Genevieve, she defended. She likes Genevieve. Trudy shrugged, looking like she didn't believe it. The point I'm trying to make is about Violet, not Rose. It's no secret that Genevieve used her friendship with Violet to steal awards along with those seedlings. Would Genevieve really steal, though? Hillary asked. It wasn't the first time she heard this accusation. Trudy laughed, again condescendingly. Hillary was starting to wonder if it was the only tone Trudy knew. You're very trusting, Trudy accused. Of course Genevieve would. Like I said, it's no secret. Everyone knows what Genevieve is capable of. I envy the woman her cunning. I would never wish her harm, but not everyone feels the same. Hillary frowned. If they know what Genevieve is capable of, how could they have made her president of the club? Because Genevieve throws a hell of a party, and around here it's about your resources, about who you know and what you know. Besides, Violet is a great secretary. If Genevieve dropped any slack, Violet would pick it up. The hierarchy works for everyone. Everyone except Violet, Hillary thought. She was glad Trudy was so talkative, sharing things with her without Hillary having to ask much. She didn't like Trudy, but she was happy with the information she'd gained. She considered what Trudy had told her. If she were Violet, she would have been angry and resentful too. Having prizes and positions snatched from underneath your nose had to hurt. She thought back to how resentful Violet had been when she had spoken to Rose at Antonio's the morning of the fire. It made so much more sense now. What Hillary also remembered was that Rose hadn't been the only one to take a matchbook from reception. Violet had taken one too. Hillary finally left the greenhouse, her mind spinning with what she had learned. As with anything, there were so many more sides to the story. Trudy had suggested that Violet had had a hand in things. On the one hand, it made Hillary feel a little more hopeful about Rose's non-involvement. She had refused to believe from the start that her friend had been involved at all, but there had been the matchbook she had found on the scene and Rose's odd behavior to consider. And Preston had taken Rose to the station for questioning. Of course, that could have been for a number of reasons. Rose knew Genevieve well, and Preston might have needed an outsider's information. But it had unnerved Hillary. Thinking now that someone else had been involved, that there was a chance it hadn't been Rose after all, helped Hillary breathe a little easier. Hillary headed back to something special to relieve Annabelle for her lunch hour. With only two of them at the shop now, they were going to have to take turns. When Rose was around and there were three of them, it helped everyone. She would be back soon, Hillary told herself. Preston would release her the moment he found out she hadn't been involved. He would release her because she was innocent. Hillary could only hope she was right. "How are things here?" Hillary asked when she returned to the store. "Fine," Annabelle said. "It's a slow day, so I haven't struggled without Rose. Do you think she's okay?" "I think she's perfectly fine," Hillary said, trying to convince herself as well as Annabelle. "She's in good hands with Preston." Annabelle rolled her eyes. "Yeah, you think he's the glittering center of the universe," she said. "Don't pretend that you don't know what it's like to be interested in someone, to see more in them than you did before," Hillary countered. Annabelle blushed, knowing exactly what her mother was referring to. The man Annabelle had her sights set on was different from the others she had met, and she planned to go to Antonio's during her lunch hour to see him. But it wasn't the same. Annabelle was young and free, allowed to find her soulmate. Hillary had already found hers, married him, and had a wonderful life. Annabelle still felt that Hillary would somehow be betraying her father if she started dating again. Technically, Hillary was as free as Annabelle was. But Annabelle hated the idea of seeing Preston and Hillary together, and even though nothing had come of it, yet, she still didn't like the way her mother talked about the police chief. "I'm going for lunch," Annabelle said, cutting the conversation short. She didn't want to admit to her mother that she was right, that she was interested in someone and saw him differently than she had before now, too. "You can take an hour and a half, too, even if you want," Hillary said. Annabelle brightened. "Are you sure?" Hillary nodded. "If it's a slow day, it should be all right. I took quite a while when I was out just now. Let's make it fair." Annabelle smiled and gave her mom a quick hug before leaving the shop. Hillary watched her daughter leave, smiling too. She'd noticed Annabelle's extra makeup and could guess where Annabelle was going for lunch. Her daughter deserved to find love. Hillary was glad she had given her daughter an extra long lunch break. She remembered what it was like to be young and in love, to have endless possibilities and options for finding someone to give everything to. Hillary spent the next hour arranging the shelves, dusting them, making sure that what was on them wasn't old. She took care of the stock in the storage room and updated the books on the counter. An hour and a half after Annabelle had left, Hillary phoned her. There was an entry in Annabelle's handwriting that didn't make sense. "Is it urgent?" Annabelle asked when she answered the phone and sounded irritated. "I can check it when I get back to the shop." "You sound upset," Hillary said. "I am," Annabelle admitted. "I came here to see him, the bartender, but he's here flirting with someone else. Just because she's famous." "Oh, young love," Hillary thought. "Who is it?" she asked. There was only one famous person in town that she knew of. Samantha Justin. Everyone is talking about her. It's the only reason I know her name. She's some author, and this guy is fawning over her like she's amazing. I bet she's almost 10 years older than him. Hillary shook her head. She had met Samantha Justin at the book signing, and the woman had come across as confident. She could understand that it could translate into arrogance in the right situation. I ought to march up to him and ask him what he thinks he's doing, talking to her. Don't do that, Hillary said. She could imagine it would only make a scene. You're not serious about each other, are you? Exclusive in any way? Annabelle huffed. I thought what we had meant something, she said. He was perfect. Everyone seems perfect at first, especially when they're attractive and they know the right words, Hillary said. He doesn't seem so perfect anymore, Annabelle said. This woman is talking to him about all the different ways to commit crimes and not get caught, and it's giving me the creeps. And he's totally into it and ignoring me completely. It's so irritating. Maybe he's not the one for you, sweetheart, Hillary said. She was relieved Annabelle wasn't considering doing something drastic anymore. The last thing she wanted was for her daughter to make a scene with a famous person. Annabelle was free to do as she pleased, being 24 and capable of living her own life, but Rosemary Harbor was a small town, and Hillary didn't want rumors to spread about her daughter. There weren't many dating prospects in the first place, and rumors would only narrow it down even more. Besides, Hillary had realized that staying out of the rumor mill and not being someone that everyone gossiped about was better than being the talk of the town. She had heard enough things about enough people to know that rumors and gossip were never positive, and neither Hillary nor Annabelle needed that kind of negativity when they had both moved to Rosemary Harbor to start over. Why don't you finish up there and come back to the shop, darling? Hillary said. Forget him. You'll find your Mr. Right. Okay, Annabelle agreed. You're right, there's still time for me to meet someone special. They ended the conversation, and Hillary was glad she had managed to talk Annabelle down from the ledge. She knew what heartbreak and disappointment felt like, and even though it was a part of life, she didn't like that it would still happen to her daughter. If she could prevent it from happening without meddling in her child's life, she would do what she could. When Annabelle returned to the shop, she wasn't in the best mood, but her mother had been right, maybe the bartender wasn't the best man for her. What Annabelle had realized while she had spoken to her mother was that she could talk to her mom about anything. It meant something to her. Few women felt they could speak openly with their mothers, at least among the friends Annabelle had known in Miami, and she felt that if nothing else, she had a wonderful relationship with Hillary. Chapter 7. Hillary was starting to put the pieces of the puzzle together, but she wasn't clear on the picture she was unveiling yet. She was sure Rose was innocent. She refused to believe that the woman she had been friends with for a year had it in her to burn down the bookstore and risk Genevieve's life. Especially if she was against Trudy. But Trudy had mentioned Rose had gone to those lengths before. She had suggested that Rose had committed arson once upon a time, so it would be easy to connect the dots and assume the woman had done it again. Still, Hillary was sure she was missing something. There was more to the story. She wanted to find out what had happened with Rose so many years ago, and if she really had been guilty of arson. She couldn't ask Rose directly, of course. And the gossip around town would be biased at best. The one place Hillary thought she could go to find out what she needed to know about the town was the library. Libraries had all sorts of records, from history books to old newspaper records. And newspapers told the stories that Hillary was interested in. Hillary decided to pay the library a visit as soon as she had the chance. Annabelle and Hillary unlocked something special the next morning. "Polly wants a cracker," Spot squawked. Annabelle laughed and shook her head. "You're so far above that," she said, and fished in her pocket for an almond. The bird preferred nuts over everything. "You can't feed him too much of that," Hillary reminded Annabelle. Spot's nut affinity had gotten them all in trouble more than once. I just want to show him I love him, Annabelle said, scratching Spot behind the head. The way to a man's heart is through his stomach, Spot said, quoting something Matthew had always said after a good meal. Annabelle smiled, thinking back to her dad before she walked to the storage room to unpack the stock for the day. The phone rang and Hillary picked up the call. Something special, where every moment is special. This is Hillary speaking. I'd like to place an order, a voice said on the other side of the line, and Hillary nodded, pulling the order book closer. She scribbled down the details. The teachers of Rosemary Harbor Elementary were putting money together for a gift. Who is it for? Hillary asked after confirming they had the order items in stock. It's for Janine Berger at the library, the voice said. Hillary perked up. What a beautiful coincidence that an order for the library had come through, just as she had wanted to find out a little about the town's history. I'll put the order together and deliver it this afternoon, Hillary said. That's perfect. Hillary dropped the call and walked to the storage room with the order page to put the basket together. Once she had the contents, she wrote a note with the message the teachers wanted to send. It was a gift of appreciation. I'm running this to the library, Hillary said to Annabelle after she had artfully arranged the goodies in the basket. You're okay with the shop? I've got this, Annabelle said, walking to the shelves and arranging them one by one. I'll be glad when Rose is back. Hillary nodded. Hopefully that will be soon. Her stomach tightened with nerves. She hoped nothing would happen to Rose, that she wasn't guilty. Determination replaced the guilt as Hillary left the shop with her order. She was going to find out what had happened in the past, and she would prove that Rose was innocent one way or the other. Before going to the library, she stopped at Corner Coffee. It was a little shop on the corner up the street from Something Special, and Hillary often bought coffee there. The place was cozy, and it always smelled like freshly roasted coffee beans. She ordered herself a cup of coffee and another for Janine Berger. When Lydia, the barista, handed her the cups, Hillary smiled and thanked her. The library was a beautiful building dating from the early 1950s, and the town had worked hard to maintain it. Hillary didn't usually visit the library. She preferred buying her books so she could revisit favorite passages or even reread the entire books whenever she wanted. But the library had a wonderful atmosphere. I have a delivery for you, she said to Janine when she walked to the counter with the basket. Janine was in her 40s. Her dark hair was in a high bun on her head, her large round glasses emphasizing her hazel eyes, and her bone structure was delicate, skin like porcelain. Oh, what a surprise, Janine said and read the card. She smiled. Bless their souls, she said. Thank you, Hillary. I hope you enjoy it, Hillary said. Then she offered Janine the extra cup of coffee she had picked up. This is from me, she said. I thought it would be nice to have a quick coffee break. Janine thanked her for the coffee and took a sip. Oh, this is so much better than the pot I have in the back. Thank you. I was hoping you could help me with my own research, Hillary said after they made small talk about the weather and discussed how Genevieve was doing. She was still unconscious, although they had been able to move her out of ICU. Neither of the women was sure if it was good or bad news. The history of the town is very interesting, Hillary started. It's so exciting to learn about a new place, especially one where I live. It's hard to imagine a time when Rose Humbert didn't own almost every shop around. Hillary had started with a roundabout story about the business history, hoping Janine would talk about the arson herself. It's interesting you would say that, Janine said. Rose practically has a monopoly around here. It's very rare for someone like Rose, who came from humble beginnings, to end up with so much. She has great business savvy. You seem to know a lot about her, Hillary said. Oh yes. I know it's a little creepy because I know her personally, and we all live here and everything, but I used the history of Rosemary Harbor and its businesses as part of a research project when I completed my master's degree. Really? Hillary said. What was it about? about strong women and how they build themselves up in a mainly chauvinistic society. Hillary couldn't believe her luck. Everything was coming together perfectly, and she hadn't had to ask a single question that proved she was looking for facts about an arson crime. Janine was happy to talk about Rose and her journey to become a business mogul. When Rose came to Rosemary Harbor, she was in her 20s, and the place was barely on the map. She had virtually nothing to her name. She built a life for herself, working harder than anyone the town had ever seen before, so she could apply for a loan at the bank. Her dream had apparently been to own a coffee shop. Hillary could imagine it. She had seen photos of Rose when she was younger, an upright woman with determination and ambition clear on her face. She bought her coffee shop and it did so well. Rose had the magic touch. She had always said she added love to every cup, and it was what had brought the money rolling in. It wasn't long before she had paid off her loan and applied for a second one to buy another shop. She had wanted to expand her repertoire. Hillary sipped her coffee as she listened intently. Rose's story was interesting. She had always known Rose was a strong person and that she had worked hard to get where she was. Seeing her friend through the eyes of another was an angle Hillary had never had before, and it made her realize that she wanted desperately for Rose to be innocent. She wanted to ask about the arson in Rose's past, but she wouldn't push Janine. The woman was happy to talk about everything, and Hillary hoped she'd bring up the arson herself. Janine told Hillary how Rose had bought one business after another. She had bought businesses that were on the brink of failure, and she'd brought them back one by one. She had been a shark, and no one had been able to stop her. Everything Rose had done had been perfectly legal, until she broke the rules of the game. Hillary knew this was what she was after. It was what she had gone to the library to find out. Rose had wanted a retail store that had opened next to where Antonio's is now, Janine said. Isn't it a shoe store? Hillary asked. Janine nodded. Yeah, Rose owns it. Hillary hadn't known the shoe shop belonged to Rose, too. What happened? Hillary asked. The woman who owned the retail shop didn't want to sell. Rose kept raising her offer, but the woman still refused. Finally, Rose took matters into her own hands, and it's the one thing she swears to this day she's not proud of doing. At night, when the shop was empty and the town was locked up and asleep, she set fire to the shop. It was a very clever fire, too. Hillary couldn't believe that her friend, the woman she thought she knew, had done something like that. What do you mean, a clever fire? Hillary asked. It burned the shop and all its contents, but left the building structurally sound. That sounds exactly like what happened with the bookshop, Hillary thought, worried. Anyway, Janine continued, the owner didn't have the money to fix it up, so she listed it for sale and Rose scooped it up for next to nothing. She used all the money she had originally offered for the place to rebuild. Hillary shook her head. I assume since you know about it, she was caught, she asked. She confessed. But the owner refused to press charges. I'm not quite sure why, so it never went to court or anything like that. Of course, with the gossip in this town, it was a sort of social suicide for Rose anyway. That was a long time ago, but even today, not many people who know what she did like her. Hillary thought of Trudy, who had known what had happened, and the terrible rivalry between the two. It made sense now. It's funny that it's so similar to what happened to Genevieve, Janine said, her voice trailing off. Her eyes widened when she realized what she'd said, and she looked at Hillary, snapping her mouth shut. They stood in awkward silence together for a while, Janine shuffling from one foot to the other. Look, she finally said. I've always liked and respected Rose. What happened is horrible, but I'm not saying that this had anything to do with her. I didn't take it that way, Hillary said. I was purely interested in the history of the place. It wasn't quite true, of course, and Janine didn't seem to be appeased by it. She still looked uncomfortable, and the atmosphere in the library was strained now, where it had been amicable before. A lot of people have a lot to say around here, but the town is notorious for its gossip, Janine said again. It's really no big deal. I mean, Rose made her peace with what happened, and with no charges being pressed, it was obviously resolved between the two of them. The people who shunned Rose or who spoke ill of her were just jealous. She did so much good, it's horrible that some remember only the one thing she did wrong. That was a pretty major wrong thing, Hillary thought, but she only nodded. It's all right, Janine, she said. Thank you for sharing the story with me. I appreciate it. And you have every right to draw the parallel between the two crimes, because they're very similar. You haven't offended me. I know you're close to Rose, though, Janine said. Hillary nodded. And I still think Rose is an amazing person. Thank you so much for your time. Janine told Hillary she was welcome anytime. Hillary walked out of the library and walked down the road to her delivery van. When she turned the corner, Preston was on his way up the road, and they nearly ran into each other. Preston, Hillary said, what a surprise. Sorry, Hillary, Preston said. He was in a rush, and Hillary was immediately curious. You're in a hurry, Hillary commented. Preston nodded. I got news about Genevieve, he said. Is she okay? Hillary asked, concerned. Oh yes. She's finally woken up. Preston looked from side to side, as if checking to see if they had listeners nearby. The road was empty. I shouldn't be telling you this, what with your new resolution to stay out of things. But Genevieve's memory is fully intact, something the doctors were worried about, and she mentioned the previous case of arson that took place around these parts. Nothing else she said made sense, but it's something to go by. Hillary swallowed her response. Preston was on his way to the library, she realized. And he would look up the retail business and what had happened there as Hillary had done. It didn't look good for Rose at all. Hillary wanted to stop Preston, to tell him that whatever it was Genevieve had been trying to say, it couldn't be Rose behind it. But she had no proof that Rose was indeed innocent. And she didn't want to tell Preston that she had been investigating the one thing he would ask her to stay out of. I have to be on my way, Preston said. I'll see you soon. Hillary watched the police chief walk away. She didn't know what to think. She wasn't sure for a fact that Rose hadn't committed the crime. Rose had a history, after all. But Rose must have learned from her mistakes, right? Surely she wouldn't do the same thing twice. Still, Hillary wasn't 100% sure, and that made her feel down about what she had found out and what Preston might find out from Janine. Hillary wondered what it was that Genevieve had tried to say. Preston was following up on the smallest lead, which was what he should have been doing as a police officer. But Hillary wished he would wait until they could learn the rest from Genevieve. Even if all it did was buy Rose more time. Without any other ideas or leads, Hillary had no choice but to go back to something special. There was nothing to do but sit and wait until they knew more. Hillary was worried about Rose and which dots Preston would connect with the information he found at the library. She hoped it wasn't anything he could use. Hillary tried to imagine what the shop and her life at Rosemary Harbor would be like without Rose, and couldn't. Rose was the life of Rosemary Harbor in so many ways. But all she could do was wait it out. Pity Hillary had never been great at the waiting game. Chapter 8. After the shop closed, Annabelle went home, but Hillary stayed behind to take stock. She didn't have to go through everything again, but Rose was on her mind, and she wanted to mull over what she had learned from Janine and what Preston had said when she had run into him. Preston said that Genevieve had spoken about Rose's past, and Hillary was scared Rose would be convicted based on something she did years ago. The cases were so similar that it would be easy to think that Rose had done it again. But Hillary wasn't sure her friend would have made the same mistake twice. Not if she had confessed to it the first time. Rose must have known how hard it would be for her after she'd admitted her involvement in the fire so long ago. That she had still confessed indicated remorse. Surely someone who felt bad about it wouldn't do it again? Of course, Hillary was speculating that Rose had felt bad. It could have been that Rose had confessed for other reasons. Unless Hillary asked Rose directly, she would never find out what was real. But that was a moot point now. Rose was still being held at the police station. If Preston hadn't let her go right away, that meant he suspected something. And after what Genevieve had said, it only looked grimmer. So Hillary took stock when it wasn't necessary and rearranged the entire shop because working hard was the only remedy for a painfully busy mind. When she finally went home, she opened the door to a dark house. Only a small lamp in the living room was burning, and Hillary heard romantic music blaring from the television. She knew what was happening. Every now and then, Annabelle decided to have a romance night. It was what she liked to call it. She binge-watched tearjerker romance movies and stuffed her face with ice cream. Hillary wasn't in the mood for a night weeping over heroines who lost their lovers and heroes who fought for their damsels in distress. She had too much on her mind, and she was upset about the way things had turned out with the case so far. "Have you eaten?" Hillary asked Annabelle. "I grabbed something from Antonio's on the way home," Annabelle said. "I got you something too. It's in the fridge." What a sweet child, Hillary thought. Cooking was the last thing she was in the mood for. When she opened the fridge, a takeaway box with fettuccine Alfredo waited for her. Her favorite. Hillary warmed up the food and walked into the living room with it. "Is everything okay, Mom?" Annabelle asked when Hillary came in. "You worked very late." Hillary shrugged. Annabelle looked like she was going to continue with her movie, but instead, she paused it and turned to Hillary. "What's up?" she asked. Annabelle knew something was bothering her mom. It was why she had bought her food, so she didn't have to cook. Annabelle knew from experience that Hillary worked herself to death if something was bothering her. "I don't know what to make of this whole business with Rose," Hillary admitted. "When she was taken in, I was sure she would be back in no time because she was innocent. But she's still there. It makes me think Preston has something on her." Annabelle shook her head. "That's impossible. What could he possibly have to hold her there? Rose is a model citizen." "That's the thing," Hillary said. "She's not." Hillary relayed what she had heard at the library about Rose and the arson years ago. "Wow," Annabelle said, shocked. "I never had a clue Rose was capable of something like that. She's so nice." "She is," Hillary said. "But she wasn't always. We all have histories. We've all done things we regret." Annabelle thought about that. She knew she was still young, but she didn't think that everyone had done bad things once upon a time. And knowing that Rose had done something as horrible as burning down a building cast a different light on a woman she had looked up to since she had arrived in Rosemary Harbor. Still, to think Rose had done something like that again was impossible. "Preston will have to let her go sooner or later," Annabelle said. "He can't keep her forever, not if they don't find any new evidence." Hillary sighed. "But they did." Annabelle frowned. "Like what?" "Genevieve is awake. Preston told me she told him to look into Rose's past." Annabelle shook her head. "It didn't sound right." "Diana came into the shop today when you were out," Annabelle said. Diana was Genevieve's cousin, and because Genevieve was family, she had the inside scoop on what was happening with her great-aunt. She was there to order a gift for Genevieve as a get-well present, something they could send as a family in light of what had happened. Hillary nodded. She knew Diana well enough. She was a little older than Annabelle, and she didn't know how to keep anything to herself. The whole world knew her business. She was almost as bad as Rose, and they relied on her right now to find out what was going on with Genevieve, as her close family refused to share the news. No one had managed to shut Diana up, and all the nosy neighbors in town were grateful for it. Other family members also phoned in for orders, Annabelle said. But only Diana talked about what happened. "I heard from her that Genevieve had woken up and that Preston had been there the moment she'd opened her eyes to get a statement. Diana said she was upset that she hadn't even had a chance to take a breath as a conscious woman before Preston had whipped out his notepad to ask questions. Annabelle was making such a long story of it, and Hillary was getting impatient. She wanted to know the facts, but Annabelle was getting swept up in the drama around it, as was her nature. Annabelle was an empathetic person who felt for everyone she came into contact with, even when it wasn't necessary. It was a beautiful characteristic and a terrible flaw all at once. Did Diana say what Genevieve had said to Preston exactly? Hillary asked, cutting Annabelle short. Yeah, she said hummingbird. What? It didn't make any sense at all. That's what I said, Annabelle said. Of course, Diana was trying to make things mysterious. But apparently, Hummingbird was the name of the retail shop that Rose had bought after it had burnt down or something like that. It's that shoe shop next to Antonio's now. So I guess based on what you just told me, Hummingbird was the shop Rose set on fire. Hillary shook her head. That's the strangest thing to say when you wake up from a coma after nearly burning to death, she said. I wouldn't even have known what she meant by it. I said the same thing to Diana, asking her how Preston had drawn the parallel in the first place, but she said that everyone who was around here when it had happened knew exactly what it meant. The name apparently has a connotation to it. Hillary couldn't believe it. Maybe Genevieve had indeed been talking about the store that had burned down so many years ago. But if that was the only word she had said, it made no sense that Preston could use it against Rose. It wouldn't incriminate her in any way. It wasn't a confession or anything. It was a simple word. What did Preston ask her exactly? Hillary asked. Why was that her answer? I don't know if everything Diana told me is true, Annabelle warned. She tends to blow things up a bit. But she said Preston asked if Genevieve knew who had started the fire, if she knew who was behind it. And the answer was Hummingbird? Annabelle shrugged. Her eyes trailed back to the frozen television screen, and Hillary knew her daughter had had enough talk for the night. She wanted to go back to her sappy movies. I'll leave you to your movies, Hillary said. Don't you want to join me? Annabelle asked. I have more than enough ice cream, and you can choose some of the movies if you want. No, thank you, sweetheart. I think I'm going to catch up on my reading. Hillary had even more to think about than she'd had before. What Annabelle had said spun through her mind as she tried to make sense of it. Preston had been in a hurry to get to the library to find out the history of the retail shop Rose had burned down. Hummingbird, it had been called. But the word alone couldn't be enough to incriminate Rose or to prove her guilt in any way. Surely, if Rose had been the guilty party and Genevieve had known about it, wouldn't she have merely said Rose and not Hummingbird? It was much easier to say for someone who couldn't speak all too well, and it made more sense. Nothing added up right now, and it bothered Hillary when she couldn't piece a mystery together. Especially if it was about someone who was very dear to her. Hillary walked to the bedroom and changed into comfortable clothes. She untied her shoulder-length hair and walked to the bookshelf where she tried to decide which book to read. She wasn't in the mood for a romance. She had turned Annabelle down for the same reason. With the irritable mood she was in now, romance wasn't going to cut it. Hillary didn't have many other genres on her shelf. She picked up the book she had bought at the book signing the night Samantha Justin had to move it to the restaurant. Hillary had been pushed into buying the book and accepting the signature, but maybe it would come in as a handy distraction tonight. Hillary curled up on the bed, but she didn't open the book. Annabelle's words were still mulling around her head. Diana was prone to exaggeration. She loved the attention her gossip offered, and sometimes her stories became almost unbelievable. But Hillary was inclined to believe what she had heard this time. Maybe it was because Hillary hoped Rose would be innocent, and Diana's stories made it more probable. But Hillary believed it. It gave her hope that Preston didn't have anything to go by to officially arrest Rose. She was in police custody because they had reason to suspect her, but they didn't have enough proof to charge her, which was good, but Hillary would feel better when her friend was free to walk away. To be implicated in a crime because of her past was a terrible thing. Unless she had done it, Hillary thought. That possibility was always there, and it bugged Hillary that she didn't know for sure whether Rose had done it. She wanted to believe that Rose was innocent, but Hillary still felt the need to prove it, for the sake of the townsfolk as well as herself. Because deep down, there was a tiny seed of doubt. Rose's past did make it seem a little more likely that Rose could have done it. It would have been easier to say she was innocent if her history didn't have a case of the exact same type of arson. But Hillary wanted to believe that Rose was innocent, and even though she doubted it from time to time, she would stick to her beliefs. Rose deserved that from her. No one else was willing to back her and believe she was innocent, and Hillary wanted to be a friend to Rose when Rose had always been the same for her. Hillary turned her attention to the book she had picked up. The cover was black with orange flames on it, as well as the smug face of a woman. How apt, she thought. She turned the book over and the blurb promised everything but romance, which was exactly what Hillary was after. Before starting on the book, she retrieved her tablet and opened Goodreads. She typed in the title and the author and waited for the reviews to load. Plenty of good things had been said about the book, but Hillary noticed there were comments from Genevieve herself. She seemed to get a lot of reaction from other readers to her posts too. Hillary remembered vaguely hearing that Genevieve, being the owner of a bookstore and a voracious reader, was a formidable critic, and her voice was valued by other critics and readers. Genevieve's comments weren't as positive as some of the others. In fact, Genevieve was quoted in several blogs and nationally accepted reviews about how she did not like the book, that the plot was left wanting and some of the characters were underdeveloped. Hillary felt some of Genevieve's comments bordered on brutal. She was surprised the author, Samantha Justin, had planned to have a signing in Genevieve's shop. She continued looking at the comments. There were running arguments about the book. Some readers agreed with Genevieve's statements, and other readers feverishly fought for Samantha's dignity as an author. It wasn't hard to see that Genevieve's blunt views had upset a few readers while it had drawn others to her. It took a strong voice to get a reaction like that. Sounds from the living room distracted Hillary, and she tiptoed to check on Annabelle. Her daughter was glued to the television screen, sniveling and eating ice cream. Hillary smiled to herself. Annabelle was a hopeless romantic, and she had long accepted that Annabelle felt emotions very strongly. She loved absolutely, and even though she got hurt as a result sometimes, it was a treasure that few people were in possession of these days. Hillary returned to her room, unwilling to get involved in the woeful sobs of her daughter. She opened Trial by Fire and started reading. Contrary to what some of the comments said about the book online, Hillary found she enjoyed it. Samantha was a good writer. She painted pictures with her words and brought the setting to life. The characters weren't as complete as Hillary would have liked, but she found she could identify with them, and that was all that was needed for a good book. She understood what Genevieve had picked up, though. She knew that to some people, flawed characters were the downfall of books. Hillary had read enough books and their reviews to know how people differed in their opinions. Hillary read until the early hours of the morning. Annabelle finished her movies and finally went to bed, saying goodnight to Hillary before she was off. Hillary made herself tea twice, but she didn't go to bed despite being tired. The book had gripped her. She hadn't liked Samantha when she had met her, and after what Annabelle had told her about Samantha flirting with the younger bartenders, her dislike had only been strengthened. But she had to admit the woman could write. About 3/4 into the book, the heroine devised a plan for arson. Hillary sat up. It seemed to be the topic of the week. Arson was suddenly everywhere, end-of-the-road books, Rose's past, and now in this book. Genevieve had very specifically mentioned the arson scene, and Hillary was curious to find out what she herself thought of it. Genevieve had explicitly stated that the entire section was far-fetched, that it was impossible, and that it detracted from the rest of the book, which was more realistic. When Hillary read it, she could see where Genevieve was coming from, but something was wrong. Something didn't quite add up. She tried to put her finger on it, and went back to the beginning of the chapter to read it all again. It was a simple story of revenge, of survival, of doing whatever it took to ensure the outcome of something important. But it was too familiar, and it was unsettling. Hillary couldn't place what it was that bothered her. She put the book down and walked to the sliding door that led to the patio. She needed a break from the story. When she looked at her watch, it was 3 a.m. She had almost read through the night. Hillary breathed in, and the cold night air smelled of the ocean. She could hear the waves crashing on the shore some distance away, now that the world had fallen quiet. A million stars were scattered across the inky black canvas above her like pinpricks of light. Being out in the open was a wonderful break after Hillary had been caught up in the book. It was easy for Hillary to get lost in another world, in characters that didn't exist. Now that she had distanced herself from the book, Hillary could think clearly about what she had read. She turned the events over in her mind again and again, and the more she thought about it, the more she felt she disagreed with Genevieve. She didn't know why, but something was different. Suddenly, Hillary knew what it was. She hurried back inside and picked up the book, reading through the arson chapter yet again. She realized now what it was that she disagreed with. Genevieve had said that the arson scene was unrealistic, impossible even. Hillary might have been inclined to agree, had she not been convinced otherwise, by real-life events. The scene Samantha had written wasn't as far-fetched as Genevieve had suggested. In fact, it was very possible. Hillary knew it was possible because it had happened not once, but twice in Rosemary Harbor, almost exactly the way Samantha had described it. The first incidents had occurred at Humbert. The second at End of the Road Books. Chapter 9. Hillary fought to rest after she had realized what was happening, but she did finally fall asleep. When she woke up again, it was with a determination to find all the answers and to show that Rose was innocent. Long before it was time to open something special, Hillary was showered, dressed, and heading to the police station. She announced herself at the front desk and asked for Police Chief Preston Davis. "I'm sorry," the lady behind the reception desk said. "Official hours don't start until 9. Unless you have a prior appointment with Chief Davis?" Hillary shook her head. "I don't, but it's urgent." "If you need to log a case, we can assist you over there," she said and pointed a manicured nail. "I don't need to open a case, I need to talk about an existing case," Hillary said. Couldn't she see that this was serious? "Hillary," Preston said, walking through the police station doors. He wore his coat and carried a briefcase, looking fresh and ready for the day. Hillary noted that he was quite handsome so early in the morning, but it was not the time to dream about things as trivial as an attraction to a good-looking guy. She had something important to say. "Preston, I need to speak with you." "It's urgent," she said. Preston glanced at the receptionist, who pulled up her shoulders as if to say, "I tried." "Come through to my office," Preston conceded. Hillary followed Preston into the belly of the station, relieved. She realized she had never been in Preston's office, and she looked around. A picture hung on the wall, and a wilting fern sat forlornly in the corner. On the desk, Preston had a picture frame, but Hillary couldn't see the picture. "What's wrong?" Preston asked, sitting on the edge of his desk, coat folded over his arm. "I read Samantha Justin's book last night. It's about arson, and it's quite good. This is between you and me. I don't want the world to know that I'm the one telling you this, but I think I know who set the fire in the bookshop." Preston opened his mouth to speak, but Hillary wouldn't let him. "It's Samantha Justin. The author. She's hiding behind her fame and her charm, but it was her. If you read through the descriptions here, the way she set up the scene." Hillary opened the book to the right chapter and held it out for Preston to take. He only glanced at the book. He didn't take it or even read the parts that Hillary had highlighted. If you'll just read this, Hillary insisted, you'll notice the arson that happened at Genevieve's shop is the same as. Preston held up his hand, and Hillary's sentence trailed off. His face was serious, and she realized that since she had walked into his office, his manner hadn't been very inviting or friendly. He didn't sit behind his desk, and he hadn't offered her a seat either. He was being standoffish, and she didn't like it. It's the same as the fire that Rose had started when she was younger, Preston said. Hillary was shocked that Preston would draw the line back to Rose when she was standing right in front of him with the book Samantha Justin had written as evidence. That's not what I'm trying to say, Hillary said. But it's what I'm saying, Preston said. And I'm the officer handling the case. I'm sure you have your theories, as you have had before, Hillary. But I recall asking you to stay out of police business. So, if a civilian comes to you with facts, you're not going to listen because it's none of their business? Hillary shot back. Preston sighed. Hillary, please. It looks the same as Rose's case of arson before. It's the same style and the same reason. Hillary shook her head. She had hoped to find a friend in Preston after she went to him with her facts, an ally. What do you make of this? She asked. She pulled out the matchbook she found at the scene of the crime and showed it to Preston. This was taken from Antonio's, the restaurant Samantha frequents. Where did you get that? Preston asked. It was half buried beneath the broken glass. At the bookshop. Preston shook his head. I know you like scenarios like this, Hillary, he said. You have a keen eye and a knack for figuring things out. If I were to take that matchbook for evidence, I would have to ask you why you held onto it for so long. If you're withholding evidence, it's a crime. Hillary swallowed hard. She had only been trying to keep Rose safe. But I can't even use that as evidence, no matter where you found it. And anyway, it's not Antonio's official design. See, I have one I took from there myself. He opened a desk drawer and took out a matchbook. There's a local artist who designs matchbooks for different restaurants around town. They're all somewhat similar, but they're all definitely different. Hillary frowned at the matchbook in her hand and then compared it to Preston's. When she looked at them both closely, she realized Preston was right. The design was a little different, even though they used the same colors. Hillary sighed. In her mind, that was one more thing that let Rose off the hook. Please, just read this, Hillary said to Preston. Preston glanced down at the book again, but still didn't touch it. It was like he wasn't interested in anything Hillary had to show him. If I had to catch criminals based on fiction, my jail cells would be full of dreamers, Hillary. Thank you for coming. I appreciate what you're trying to do. I know Rose is a close friend. But she needs a lawyer now, not a friend. Go back to the shop, carry on with your job, and let me do mine. Hillary couldn't believe how cold Preston was being. She was so angry. But she knew better than to argue with him. Instead, she turned around with a huff. If he wasn't going to solve the problem, she would do it herself. When she stepped outside, she noticed she had a text from Annabelle. Her daughter had run to Antonio's to pick up breakfast, and she was complaining that Samantha was there flirting with the boy she liked again. Well, wasn't that just perfect? Instead of heading to the shop, Hillary made her way to Antonio's. Annabelle was still at Antonio's, waiting for her breakfast order at the counter, when she saw her mother walk in. Hillary looked like she was on a mission, her face pulled into a scowl, and Annabelle was curious about what was going to happen. She had seen her mother in a mood like this only a few times before. Hillary plastered a smile on her face and walked to the bar where Samantha was drinking a cup of coffee. The bar didn't serve alcohol until noon, but Alberto always made sure they were open for some kind of beverage. Samantha, Hillary gushed. I hope you don't mind me intruding. Hillary knew she was being overly friendly, but there was no other way. I finished your book last night, and I can't praise you enough on your writing. Well, that's very kind of you, Samantha said with a charming smile that quickly replaced how irritated she was that Hillary had intruded on her conversation with the bartender. It's always wonderful to hear when someone appreciates my hard work. I was wondering, do you want to go outside for a smoke and discuss it? There are a few things I would have done differently. Annabelle couldn't believe what she was hearing. After her father had died of cancer, Hilary and Annabelle had both sworn off even the idea of smoking. But Hilary was clearly up to something, and Annabelle was too curious to get involved. Samantha looked shocked that Hilary wanted to discuss her writing in such depth. "What do you mean you would do things differently?" she asked defensively. "Well, I'll explain." Samantha was too proud to let a comment like that slide, and agreed to have a cigarette with Hilary outside. Annabelle followed closely behind, trying not to look like she was eavesdropping when that was exactly what she was doing. She stopped just inside the door where she could listen without being seen. Hilary had managed to get Samantha outside and away from the crowd. She had a lot to say to the woman, and even though she had her theory of who was responsible for the fire, she didn't want to confront Samantha in front of everyone in the restaurant. "Your writing is spectacular, as I mentioned," Hilary started. "But I must say there are some things in the book I don't agree with. The way you planned the arson scene is completely far-fetched. What bothered me was that the rest of the book was so well researched that this fantasy of arson was distracting." Samantha's mouth opened in surprise. "You have some nerve standing here and telling me how bad my book is. I'll have you know the book went through to editors and both agreed the scene was more than believable. I wouldn't have written it if I had thought it was too out there." Hilary shook her head. Of course, she didn't really believe what she was saying. She knew full well the arson in the book was possible. She was trying to push Samantha's buttons. The only way she was going to get a confession was if Samantha was too angry to think about what she was saying. It was the only way Preston and everyone else would see Rose was innocent. Hilary was convinced beyond a doubt now. "Oh, I know it's hard to take a step back and put everything in perspective when you're so close to the project," Hilary said. "This is why I'm telling you." Samantha was getting angry, and it was exactly where Hilary wanted her. "Are you a writer? Did you write this book?" "Oh, I'm not a writer. I haven't written anything in my life. But I read often, and I can tell you I know what I'm talking about." Samantha laughed sarcastically. "I know your type. You think because you read a couple of books, you know exactly what it takes to write one. You'll never know. That scene is perfectly believable. I know it is because things like this happen in real life." "I thought you got your ideas somewhere," Hilary said, changing her strategy. "I thought I recognized the scene. I figured out your little trick." Hilary noticed movement from the corner of her eye, and when she glanced to the side, she noticed Preston had just arrived. She raised her voice a little bit so he could hear their conversation. "You used the arson Rose was involved in as the basis of your story. That's not very original. No wonder there are plot holes. Of course it would never have worked, not the way you wrote it." "Of course it would have worked," Samantha cried. "I know it would have worked, not only because Rosemary Harbor has seen it before. I know it works because I proved it." Samantha clapped her hand over her mouth as soon as she said the words. Her eyes widened when she noticed Preston, who had come up behind Hilary. "I can only assume you're speaking about the arson at the bookshop," Preston said to Samantha. Samantha tried to backpedal, grasping for words, but she was stuck. Hilary had managed to get a confession out of her, and Preston had been there at the perfect time. She couldn't have planned it better. Annabelle appeared a moment later, and Hilary knew her daughter had heard the whole thing. "Samantha Justin," Preston said, unclipping handcuffs from his belt. "You are under arrest for arson at End of the Road Books and the attempted murder of Genevieve Hardcore." Samantha looked panicked, her eyes rolling around in their sockets. "I didn't mean to hurt anybody," she said. "She wasn't supposed to be in the shop. It wasn't my fault she was there." "But it was convenient that she was there, wasn't it?" Hilary asked. "You didn't care to check." Samantha's panic translated back to anger. She has broken down my writing from the very start, Samantha cried. What would you have done if your career was dependent on someone who could break you with the very words they spoke? Hillary didn't have a chance to answer. She didn't want to. Preston took Samantha away, reading her rights and helping her into the police car. When the door was closed, he straightened and made eye contact with Hillary. He nodded once without saying anything before he got into the car and drove away. That was spectacular, Mom, Annabelle said, hugging Hillary. Hillary held tightly to her daughter. It was horrible to think there were people among them who would cause such harm to others. But Samantha was on her way to jail, Rose would be released soon, Genevieve would recover, and in no time everything would go back to normal. Epilogue. Preston walked into something special with a handful of wildflowers. This time, he hadn't brought any almonds with him. He wanted to thank Hillary for what she had done with the case. Nuts would only attract Spot, that bothersome bird. You come bearing gifts? Spot squawked when the bell above the door announced Preston's presence. All three women looked up, surprised to see him. Preston, Hillary said flatly. She wasn't too happy with the town police chief. He hadn't treated her very well lately. The case was solved no thanks to him, and he had held Rose at the station for far too long in her opinion. I came to apologize and say thank you for what you've done, Preston said. Hillary shook her head. It had been only a few days since Rose had been released, and she wouldn't just forget how Preston had treated her. I'm sorry, but a handful of flowers and an apology after the fact is not going to cut it. Preston looked at Rose and Annabelle, who were both shaking their heads. He was in the doghouse, and he knew it. What can I do to make it up to you? Preston asked. Maybe the two of us can? For now, you can leave my shop, Hillary interrupted. Unless you are looking for a gift of some kind for someone. Preston gaped, looking for words. He was being dismissed. Maybe he deserved it. He hadn't been very friendly toward Hillary. He had been irritated with how she had gotten involved with yet another case. She had also been the one to solve it, again. He just couldn't seem to win with this woman. And yet he really wanted to see her again, maybe take her out to dinner, see where things went. But she wasn't having it, and he didn't know what to say to make it better. That's it. Preston tried one more time. That's it, Hillary said. She watched as Preston turned around and left the shop with his flowers. Hillary felt a little bad for being so rude to Preston, but she was unhappy with how she had been treated. Preston was persona non grata at something special, and it would stay that way until he proved to her that she was important as a person and that her observations were valuable. If it weren't for her, Samantha Justin would still be out there, and Rose might be behind bars. Hillary couldn't imagine how horrible that would have been. Have I thanked you for what you did for me? Rose asked when Hillary walked back to the counter. More times than I can count, Hillary said. Well, I will always have to say it one more time. It's not just about you saving me from going to jail. It's about you and Annabelle not holding my past against me. It means more than you know. Hillary walked to Rose and hugged her friend. There are a few very special people in my life for whom I will do anything, Hillary said. Hey, where'd he go? Spot squawked, interrupting the moment. Where's my nut? The ladies laughed, and Annabelle went to fetch the bird a treat. Thanks for listening to Gardener's Greenhouse, Book 3 in the Rosemary Harbor Cozy Mystery Series. Written by Wendy Meadows, read for you by Michelle, the AI narrator. For more information on Wendy's available books, visit www.wendymeadows.com.